Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to one of the grimiest, grittiest, most paradoxically glamorous eras in American history, the Gilded Age. It's the late 1800s, and you're about to live a day in the cracked boots of the average American. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Seriously, between the factory fires, collapsing tenements, and mystery meat sandwiches, the odds are not in your favour. But hey, history isn't supposed to be comfortable, right? It's supposed to remind you how good you have it, even when your Wi-Fi is lagging. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is over there. I always like seeing where my little insomniac history crew is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun's not up yet, but you are. You always are. Your alarm clock is a mix of footsteps from the apartment upstairs, the hissing steam pipe by your cot, and your neighbour coughing like he's trying to launch a lung across the room. It's cold. You're wearing the same shirt you wore yesterday and probably the day before. No use checking your reflection in the mirror. There isn't one. Mirrors are a luxury, and you don't need one to know you've got soot under your eyes and last night's stew still clinging to your collar. You lace up your scuffed boots, one eye still closed, body sore from yesterday's shift, and you head out. Down 5 flights of wooden stairs that creak with every step, stairs that could go up in flames if someone breathes wrong near an open flame. The hallway stinks of boiled cabbage and mildew. On the street, the city's already vibrating, horse-drawn carriages clatter over cobblestones, street vendors shout about hot pies and tin spoons, and the smoke rising from the chimneys paints the sky a greasy grey. You head to the factory. It doesn't matter what it makes, textiles, steel shoes, buttons. It's loud, dark, and the floor's always slick with something unidentifiable. Inside, the machines already roar like caged animals. Your job? Feeding material into a press, or sewing linings, or shoveling coal into a furnace that spits out enough heat to curl your eyelashes. 12 hours. No breaks unless you're bleeding. And even then, only if it's a lot. Lunch is a joke. You sit on an overturned crate near the back exit, gnawing on a heel of bread that tastes like sawdust and praying no rats sneak up to investigate your pickle. If you're lucky, someone might sneak a flask around, just enough to kill the taste of the air. There's talk of a strike again. You nod like you agree, but you don't say much. You've seen what happens when someone talks too loud. Management's got eyes, and they hire men with clubs and moustaches to deal with agitators. The hours stretch. Your fingers numb. One guy next to you loses a thumb, nobody stops the machine. They just drag him out, mop the floor, and keep it running. That's the unspoken rule. The machine doesn't stop. You are replaceable. If you collapse, someone else will take your spot before your body even cools down. Quitting time is after sundown. Your muscles scream, your back aches, and your ears are still ringing from the constant clanging. You smell like smoke and grease. You stop for a newspaper. Not to read it, just to wrap it around your chest to block the wind. Headlines shout about millionaires building marble mansions on Fifth Avenue. You read the words, but they feel like fiction. Back home, the tenement is alive. Babies crying, pots clanging, someone arguing 2 doors down. You squeeze past your neighbour's laundry, duck into your unit and settle into your tiny corner. Your brother's already asleep on the floor. Your mother's coughing again. You have no privacy, no silence, and no indoor plumbing. You do, however, have a bowl of soup waiting, thinned out with water and wishful thinking. It smells vaguely of onion, mostly of salt. You eat, you don't talk much. The radio's too expensive. Books are rare. You listen to the city instead, its low hum, its occasional scream, the distant train whistle slicing through the smog. Tomorrow is the same, and the next day. And probably every day until your knees give out or the factory eats a larger chunk of you. And yet there's this strange optimism hanging in the air. It's hard to explain. Maybe it's the way the city sparkles at night with its new electric lights. Maybe it's the way you once saw a girl in a velvet dress step out of a carriage and smiled at you like you were human. Or maybe it's just the fact that you're still breathing. In this world, that's something. Historical fact. Between 1870 and 1900, the US labour force exploded, with industrial workers making up over 1/3 of the population. Average work hours were 10 to 12 per day, 6 days a week. Quirky fact, one of the most popular Gilded Age home remedies for fatigue was a tonic made with cocaine and wine. Yes, really, Coca-Cola was originally one of these tonics. Ongoing debate. Scholars still argue whether the Gilded Age was truly a time of progress or if it was a historical smokescreen, propped up by tech innovation. While most of the population lived in Dickensian poverty, you live in a tenement. It sounds fancy when you say it out loud, tenement. Like maybe it's a dignified old building with brass door handles and a bellhop named Mortimer. But no, what it really is a rotting brick box stacked on top of 100 other rotting brick boxes, filled wall to wall with families just like yours, all crammed in and hoping the roof holds for one more winter. Your room, your whole home really, is barely the size of a freight elevator. It smells like damp plaster and boiled onions, because that's what your neighbour cooks every single night, bless her heart. The wallpaper, what's left of it, is peeling like sunburnt skin. You've hung a blanket over the worst hole in the wall, partly for privacy, partly because you swear something lives back there. Probably a raccoon, maybe a ghost. You're not asking questions. There's one bed and it's shared. You're not even sure how many people sleep on it anymore. Sometimes your uncle is there. Sometimes it's your cousin's friend from work who needed a place to crash for a week and never left. You've mastered the art of curling yourself like a shrimp into the tiniest corner of mattress just to get a few hours of semi-consciousness. The floorboards groan like they're mourning something, and you've patched more than one hole with flattened tin cans and leftover cloth. Rats? Of course, they're your unofficial roommates. You've even named the boldest one Jerry. He stares at you when you eat. Sometimes you stare back. There's a mutual understanding. He doesn't touch your bread and you don't scream when he scurries across your blanket. There's no bathroom inside your apartment. There's a shared toilet in the hallway, if you can call it that. It's more of a hole above a pipe that you hope leads somewhere appropriate. If it's occupied, you wait. If it's not working, you hold it. Bathing. That's a Sunday luxury, if there's warm water, and if nobody's already used it all by the time you get your turn, and that's just your apartment. The building itself is a fire trap. The stairs are dry wood, the walls stuffed with old newspaper. And half your neighbours smoke like it's a survival tactic. If a single match hits the floor wrong, this place could go up like a paper lantern. And you wouldn't be the first. Tenement fires are so common they barely make the evening gossip anymore. People say things like, "Oh, the Hendrixes lost everything," and then move on to talking about the price of bread. Noise is constant. Someone's baby is always crying, some couple is always arguing, and you've given up figuring out what's banging against the ceiling at 2 a.m. Probably furniture, possibly a body. You learn to tune it out. You even get a little comfort from the sounds. Silence would mean something's wrong. Silence would mean someone finally died. Still, somehow, this chaos becomes normal. You learn to appreciate the rhythm of it. The old man across the hall who sings Irish ballads off key while fixing shoes in his doorway. The two little girls downstairs who chalk flowers on the sidewalk every morning before school. The woman next door who sells roasted peanuts wrapped in yesterday's news and always gives you one extra when you pass by. These are the people you survive with. And despite the grime, the lack of space and the ever-present threat of tetanus from every rusty nail sticking out of every surface, there's a strange kind of pride here. People hang curtains, even if they're just old feed sacks. They line up shoes at the door, sweep the steps every morning and keep a pot of something warm on the stove, even if it's just potato peels and onion skins. There's dignity in that. There has to be. Outside the building, the street isn't much better. Garbage litters the gutter. Kids run barefoot between horse droppings, playing tag with sticks and pretending they're pirates. Vendors shout from wagons, selling everything from fresh fish to questionable sausages. And then there's the smell. Equal parts animal coal smoke and the unmistakable tang of humanity trying its best to stay alive without indoor plumbing. But this is home. Not because you love it, not because it's comfortable, but because it's yours. Or rather, it's the only place you can afford with your $1 a day, if the foreman remembers to pay you on time. And even then, most of that dollar disappears the moment it hits your hand. Rent takes the first bite. The landlord doesn't care if your ceiling leaks or your windows rattle in the wind. He just wants his money. After rent, there's food, cheap bread, bruised vegetables, and maybe a little lard to fry something if you're feeling decadent. You might throw a penny to a street fiddler on your way home just to feel like you're part of something alive. But there's never enough. Not money, not space, not sleep, just not enough. Historical fact. By the 1890s, nearly 2/3 of New York City's population lived in tenements, most without indoor plumbing, proper ventilation, or adequate fire safety. It wasn't until the Tenement House Act of 1901 that basic regulations were enforced. Quirky fact, many tenement buildings in New York had shared dumbwaiters, that residents used to send food and messages between floors. These were often repurposed for things like sneaking pets or even whiskey bottles during Prohibition. Ongoing debate. Historians still argue whether the tenement experience built tight-knit community bonds or simply institutionalized urban poverty under the guise of affordable housing. You wake up before your body really agrees to it. Your legs ache, your lower back is screaming something that might translate to, "Why are you doing this to me?" and your right wrist has locked into a weird, semi-permanent claw shape. That's what happens when you work the same exact motion for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. There's no warm-up, no easing into the morning, just a splash of cold water to the face and the sound of the factory whistle reminding you that the machine doesn't care how tired you are. It just wants you to move. You don't own a clock. Time is measured in whistles, bells, and the pace of the street. You know exactly how long it takes to walk from your tenement to the factory if you want to clock in just before being docked. Any later, and it's a half day's pay gone. The foreman doesn't believe in excuses, especially not yours. You're not important enough to have problems. You're just a pair of hands. The walk is quiet in a groggy kind of way. The city hasn't fully woken up yet, but it never really sleeps either. You pass carts unloading barrels, men sweeping storefronts, a kid chasing a dog into an alley. Then there's the factory, big, black, bricked, and already sweating smoke into the skier. The air smells like burning oil and rust. You take one last deep breath of outside freedom, then duck inside. It's hot. It's always hot. Even in winter, the factory stays steamy from the constant heat of the machines and the sheer mass of bodies working inside. The windows are permanently open, even when there's snow. Management says it's for ventilation. Really, it's just to stop you from passing out. Your job today is the same as it was yesterday. Feeding sheets of material into a press. Each one has to be lined up just right. Too fast and you jam the rollers. Too slow and the guy behind you yells because he's got quotas to hit too. You can't wear gloves, too slippery. And after the first week, your fingerprints are pretty much sandpaper anyway. You've got tiny scars all over your palms from slips, pinches, and one particularly nasty burn that hasn't healed right. Noise is constant. It's a mechanical, teeth-rattling roar like you're working inside a metal dragon that's perpetually hungry. Talking is useless. You communicate in nods, grunts, and finger-pointing. Occasionally someone tries to yell something, but unless they're 2 inches from your ear, it's just mouth shapes and a guess. You fall into a rhythm, press, pull, repeat. Time becomes abstract. You stop thinking about hours and start thinking in batches. The world shrinks to the 3 feet of workspace in front of you, the hiss of steam and the occasional curse when someone drops something heavy. If someone gets hurt, and they often do, everything slows for a moment. The machine groans in protest, someone shouts for a supervisor, and a bloodied worker limps out, clutching what used to be a finger or a hand. You feel bad, but not surprised. You've all done the math. At this pace, it's not if you'll get hurt. It's when. Breaks aren't really breaks. There's a lunch bell, sure, but it's more like a breather than an escape. You pull out the same wrapped bit of bread, maybe a slice of salt pork if you're feeling indulgent, and sit near a back wall or loading dock. Sometimes there's a guy who plays harmonica. You don't know his name. You just know that his tunes make the sandwich taste a little less like cardboard. Then it's back inside. More pressing, more lifting, more time playing chicken with the machine. You've seen people lose fingers just trying to save a dropped piece of cloth. You don't make that mistake. If it hits the floor, it is gone. You don't even look down. By hour 10, your hands are trembling. You start hallucinating slightly. Shapes in the shadows, a voice that sounds like your brother calling your name even though he works across town. You blink, shake it off, and keep going. You're too tired to stop, too scared of what stopping means. Then finally the end whistle. It sounds like salvation. You clock out, blinking like a mole emerging from a cave. The fresh air tastes like ash and coal, but at least it's real. You head home with sore feet, soot in your nostrils, and a weird sense of accomplishment. You survived. Again. On the way back, you pass a help wanted sign. It's for another factory across town, same hours, worse pay. You wonder who they expect to take it. Then you remember a guy at work, Tommy, didn't show up today. No one knows where he went. Maybe he got sick. Maybe he got fired. Maybe he just stopped coming. You don't ask, you just keep walking. You pass a storefront window and catch your reflection, grimy, hunched, exhausted. For a second you don't recognize yourself. You think, how did I end up like this? But the question fades. You already know the answer. Everyone's in the same boat and no one's steering. Historical fact. During the Gilded Age, the average factory worker's shift was 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The idea of a weekend or 8-hour day was still decades away from becoming law. Quirky fact, some factories had signs that read, "If you're injured, stay home." The workers who did got fired for absenteeism. Others who kept working with injuries were praised for their grit, even if they were bleeding. Ongoing debate. Labour historians still discuss whether mechanised factory work created long-term upward mobility, or simply transformed human beings into disposable parts of an industrial process. You weren't always working by the time the sun came up. Once, not that long ago, you played marbles in the dirt and thought a broken broomstick was a sword, but that didn't last. You started working young, 8, maybe 9 years old, though you lied and said you were 12 because they wouldn't hire anyone younger. At least not officially. But nobody really checks. If you've got 2 working arms and can reach the conveyor belt, that's all they need. Now you're older, but not by much. 14, maybe 15. You've stopped growing, not because you're done, but because your body's too underfed and overworked to keep it up. Your back hurts like an old man's, your nails are black with grime that doesn't wash out, and your hands have the kind of scars most adults don't get until their 40s. Congratulations, you're the breadwinner now. Childhood is over, and you're still not old enough to vote. You're not alone. Every kid on your block works. The twins across the hall haul coal at the train yard. Your little sister threads bobbins in a textile mill. The smallest kids crawl inside machines to retrieve jammed parts because they're the only ones who can fit. They call it helper work, but everyone knows what it really is, the job that gets you mangled before puberty. You all carry scars. Jimmy from 2 floors up has a permanent limp from falling off a scaffolding. Nora's left hand is missing 2 fingers, caught in a belt when she was 9. Nobody talks about it much. You just adapt. School? Sure, that's a thing for some kids. Mainly the ones whose parents own the buildings or run the shops. For you, it's a dream. Maybe you went for a year, maybe 2. Just long enough to write your name and read signs. But education doesn't put bread on the table. What does is 12 hours in a sulphur-reeking plant pulling levers and learning to tune out the screams. At the factory, they call you kid, or worse, no one's gentle, no one says please. You learn fast or you get hurt. You also learn when to speak and when to keep your mouth shut. You do what the adults do, because you are one now, at least in every way that matters. You're just shorter and get paid even less. It's funny, the kinds of things that pass for entertainment in this world. Sometimes one of the older workers will teach you how to spit through your teeth or toss a coin off your elbow. You all laugh a little too hard at jokes that aren't very funny, because any laugh is something sacred here, something that reminds you you're still human. On the walk home, you carry your pay in a folded scrap of paper. It's not much. Barely enough for food, maybe a few cents for rent. If you're lucky, your mother doesn't cry when you hand it over. If she's having a hard day, she cries anyway, but hugs you so tight it knocks the air from your lungs. You don't mind? It's the closest you come to softness. Your clothes are always second-hand, or third. Your shoes are tight in some places and too loose in others, with the sole peeling off like it's trying to escape. You've patched the same pair of trousers 3 times. Your shirt's got more holes than buttons. But who are you trying to impress anyway? Everyone looks the same, thin, pale, tired. You can spot a working kid from a block away by their slouch and their hands, and the food. You dreamed about it sometimes. Real food, not the watery stew and crumbly bread you get most nights. You once had an apple, fresh and crisp, and you still think about it. Meat is rare, eggs are a gift, sugar is almost mythical. Your meals are mostly bulk, potatoes, beans, cabbage, things that fill you up without actually doing much good. Your stomach doesn't growl anymore. It's given up on complaining. You talk with your siblings at night, real late when everyone's quiet and the fire from the stove has burned down to just a faint glow. You whisper about stupid things. Maybe one day you'll buy a bike. Maybe you'll go to Chicago or San Francisco. You joke about buying a whole loaf of bread and eating the entire thing by yourself. And everyone gasps like you just told the world's greatest fantasy. Sometimes you let yourself imagine more. Going to school, learning to draw, working somewhere that doesn't grind your body into dust. But you keep that dream small. Too big and then it starts to hurt. There are moments, rare ones, where you remember what being a kid felt like. A game of stickball in the alley. A snowball fight that turned the whole block into chaos. Catching fireflies in a broken jar lid. But mostly you're just tired. Tired in a way that seeps into your bones and never really leaves. No one's protecting you. There's no law that says your job has to be safe. There's no doctor if you fall. No sick days, no vacation. You're expected to do a man's work without a man's rights or pay, and God help you if you complain. They'll just replace you with another kid fresh off the boat, desperate enough to take half your pay and smile while doing it. But here's the part that really twists the knife. Adults still call you lazy. They say you don't work hard enough, that kids today have no backbone. Like your life isn't already built around sacrifice. Like you don't already give everything you have, every single day, just to keep the lights on and the landlord away. Historical fact, in 1900, about 18% of American children between the ages of 10 and 15 were employed full-time, with the number significantly higher in immigrant and low-income families. Quirky fact, some employers paid children in company scrip, kind of fake money only usable at overpriced company-owned stores, ensuring the kids' families stayed perpetually in debt. Ongoing debate. While historians agree child labour was widespread and dangerous, some argue it helped families survive, others insist it robbed generations of both education and basic human dignity. Lunch break hits like a tired sigh. It's not the kind of break where you kick your feet up and sip something cold while watching clouds drift by. No, it's more like a brief pause in the storm, a moment to shove something vaguely edible into your mouth while keeping one eye on the factory clock and the other on the foreman's scowl. You don't eat for joy, you eat because if you don't, you'll collapse. And there's a line of desperate souls waiting to take your place if you do. You fish into your coat pocket for the parcel your mother wrapped that morning if she had time. If not, you threw it together yourself before stumbling out the door. Either way, it's the same contents. A piece of hard bread, slightly stale, maybe a slice of boiled potato if there were leftovers from last night's soup, and a smear of lard between two heel ends of bread if you're really living large. That's lunch. No thermos, no napkin, no sweet treat. Just whatever fills your stomach fast and doesn't need to be refrigerated, or even identified for that matter. You sit on a low stoop behind the building, your back to a cracked wall, boots tucked in to avoid the dripping pipe above. The smell back here is a rich bouquet of burned oil, old meat, and whatever died in the alley last week, but no one complains. You're too busy chewing. Around you, other workers huddle in small groups, some laughing weakly, others just staring into space like they're trying to dream with their eyes open. Someone passes around a flask. The first sip hits like a punch, but it warms your chest and dulls your headache. It's probably rot gut, cheap liquor made in a bathtub, but for now, it's a minor miracle. You chase it with a bite of bread and look up at the sky. Grey. Always grey. The soot in the air doesn't just coat your lungs, it stains the clouds. A few feet away, someone lights a cigarette and leans against the bricks like they're posing for a painting called Regret, but with nicotine. He starts talking about a strike. Not loud, just loud enough for the group around him. You've heard the word tossed around more often lately. Workers are tired of the 12-hour days, the missing fingers, the coughs that never go away. Someone read in the paper about labourers in Chicago shutting down an entire rail line until they got higher pay. It's inspiring, sure, but also terrifying. You listen, but you don't say much. Strikes are dangerous, not just because you could lose your job, but because companies fight back. They send hired muscle, guys with bowler hats and blackjacks who don't hesitate to crack skulls. They call them detectives, but they're just bouncers with better moustaches. You've seen it before, peaceful marches turning into bloodbaths. One wrong move and you're on the front page of the paper under the headline, "Rioters disrupt production, police respond swiftly." Never mind that you were just asking not to be paid in company store tokens. Someone mentions a meeting tonight. Secret, of course. Basement of the old church, past the docks. You nod once, quick and cautious. Maybe you'll go, maybe not, depends how brave or how stupid you're feeling after dinner. The bell rings before you're even finished chewing. You shove the rest of the bread into your mouth and wipe your hands on your coat. Time's up. No easing back in. You're thrown into the roar of machines again like you never left. The press jams once and a guy gets yelled at for it. Not his fault, but blame is cheap and easiest to throw. You keep your head down and your hands moving. Back home after the shift, you tell your mother about the strike talk. Her eyes widen for a second, then narrow. She doesn't say much. Just that your father once walked a picket line and it nearly got him killed. But she doesn't tell you not to go. She just sighs and says, "Be smart," which is mother code for "I can't stop you, but I'm scared out of my mind." Dinner is thin stew, mostly cabbage water with a few tired vegetables floating around like survivors of a shipwreck. You eat quickly, silently, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the windows. You wonder how many other families are having the exact same meal, the same quiet, the same hopeless hope, probably thousands. Later that night, you sneak out to the meeting. It's dark and you keep your collar up. The basement is damp and full of nervous energy. Someone hands out pamphlets, handwritten, smudged ink, poorly stapled. Words like solidarity, brotherhood, power. Someone else speaks. A young man with eyes that burn bright like he hasn't yet been beaten down by the system. He talks about unions, about fairness, about not dying poor and forgotten. You want to believe him. You really do. Historical fact, the Gilded Age saw an explosion of labour strikes, including the 1886 Haymarket affair in Chicago, where a peaceful protest for an 8-hour workday turned violent after a bomb was thrown and police opened fire. Quirky fact, workers during lunch sometimes played makeshift games with scrap parts, like tossing bolts into buckets for points. A factory in Pittsburgh reportedly hosted nut and washer tournaments during their 15-minute breaks. Ongoing debate. Some scholars argue that the labour movement of the Gilded Age was the birth of modern worker rights. Others say its victories were short-lived, with real reforms coming much later in the 20th century. They say the streets of America are paved with gold. That's what your cousin heard before he came over on the boat from Naples, wide-eyed and 50, carrying a sack of bread crusts and 3 shirts he thought made him look like a gentleman. He learned fast. The only gold he's seen is in the form of teeth and not his. But somewhere out there, someone's living the dream, right? Someone's got gold faucets and horse-drawn carriages just for their dogs. That's what makes the whole system palatable. They dangle the fantasy in front of your soot-smudged face like a carrot on a stick. It's not for you, but maybe for your kids, if they survive long enough. And for some, it's not a fantasy. It's Tuesday. Take a stroll down Fifth Avenue. Or better yet, dream about it, because your boots would never be allowed to touch those polished sidewalks. There, behind wrought-iron gates and marble steps, the elite live like gods. Men with names like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Morgan. You've never seen them, of course. They don't ride the trolley. They glide by in velvet-draped carriages or private train cars, sipping imported wine while you're wringing black water from your socks. Their homes are palaces, literal palaces. Gilded mirrors, chandeliers bigger than your apartment, pianos in rooms no one plays. Some of them have entire rooms just for displaying their art. Not to enjoy it, no, just to remind everyone how much it cost. You once heard that one of the Astors had a custom dog elevator installed, so her pug wouldn't have to take the stairs. Meanwhile, your building's stairs threaten to collapse every time someone goes up with groceries. It gets better. There's the food. While you're peeling mould off a potato, they're eating oysters on ice and game birds stuffed with other game birds. You've read the menus, lavish printed things that get passed around like dirty magazines among the tenement kids. You laugh and pretend it's absurd, but a little part of you wonders what it would feel like to taste something that wasn't boiled 3 times and served in silence. And let's not even talk about their clothes. Silk waistcoats, imported hats, gloves softer than your pillow. The ladies walk by with their parasols and perfume, trailing fabric worth more than your yearly wage. You sometimes pause and stare when one of them sweeps past, just long enough to forget where you are. And for that brief second, it's not resentment you feel, it's awe. Then the carriage disappears, and the street smells like manure again. You don't hate them, not exactly. How can you hate someone who lives in a different galaxy? They're not real. They're like museum exhibits, strange, glittering creatures who throw balls in mansions while you're counting pennies for soap. Still, boy, you can't ignore what their lives say about yours. Their comfort is your exhaustion. Their silence is built on your noise. Every brick in their ballroom was laid by someone who can't afford shoes. At the same time, they're celebrated. Heroes, even. Newspapers sing their praises. Industrial genius. Titan of steel. The man who built America. You wonder if anyone will ever write headlines for the people who carried steel beams up 20 stories with bare hands and no harnesses. Spoiler, they won't. Sometimes you pass the theatres where the rich go to watch opera or French plays. You peek through the side door while delivering a crate, and you see them laughing softly, fanning themselves, sipping from glasses that catch the gaslight just right. The floor doesn't creak there, the curtains aren't patched, and you think, what must it be like to live without fear? To never wonder if your cough is just a cough or something that'll keep you out of work and cost you your job. It's not just comfort they own, it's time. They can take walks, read books, get sick and recover. They can send their children to school, not just until they can sign their name, but all the way through college, where they learn Latin and logic and law. You'd be happy just learning long division without having to leave halfway through class to shovel coal. Still, you try not to let it poison you. It's not healthy to think too hard about people who float while you sink. It's better to laugh about it with your friends. tell jokes about how you'll marry a rich widow or stumble upon a treasure chest buried behind your building. Everyone's got a fantasy. Yours just comes with a side of sarcasm and blisters. But even jokes have their limits. When the landlord raises the rent again, and your brother gets docked for sneezing on the job, and your mother cries over the price of eggs, you start wondering, not in a revolutionary way, just in a tired, grinding, what if it didn't have to be like this kind of way. You don't expect to live like them, not really. You're not that naive, but maybe, just maybe, you'd like to be treated like a person. That doesn't seem like too much to ask, yet somehow, in this upside-down golden world, it is. Historical fact. During the Gilded Age, the wealth gap between the richest and the poorest Americans grew drastically. By 1890, the richest 1% controlled nearly a quarter of the nation's wealth. Quirky fact. Cornelius Vanderbilt's granddaughter Consuelo had a custom-made dog carriage with its own silk curtains and a gold leaf canopy. Her dog had a better commute than most workers. Ongoing debate. Economists and historians still argue whether the extreme wealth of the Gilded Age elites helped drive economic progress, or simply entrenched inequality behind a polished facade of innovation. The thing about bosses in the Gilded Age is, they don't just own the factory, they own you, your time, your breath, your future. They've carved it up and filed it under expenses. And if you're lucky, you'll only ever meet your immediate supervisor, a man with a permanent scowl and a mustache that seems to twitch when someone's about to get fired. But higher up, there are barons, not of royalty, of railroads, oil, coal and steel. Titans of industry, sure, but also professional boot pressers to the neck of the working class. Let's talk about them. First, there's Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King. He built an empire on the backs of men who dropped dead in mills hotter than hell. Working shifts long enough to confuse which day it is. Carnegie liked to talk about charity. Giving back, he called it. He built libraries, concert halls, universities, but you didn't see any of that if you worked in one of his plants. There you saw red-hot steel, deafening machinery, and co-workers carried out with third-degree burns. His philosophy was simple. Make as much money as you can, then spend it on philanthropy. After your workers are dead, of course. Then there's John D. Rockefeller, oil magnate, and possibly part robot, part octopus. His company, Standard Oil, didn't just dominate the industry. It was the industry. He squeezed competitors like lemons, bought out rivals, and got discounts from railroads that no one else could dream of. If capitalism were a blood sport, Rockefeller would be the undisputed heavyweight champion. His secret move? Smiling during interviews while his lawyers crushed small businesses like insects. People called him generous, too, later on, when he donated money for medical research. A lot of the diseases being studied, caused by oil refining pollution, life's funny like that. And of course, we can't forget J.P. Morgan. The man was a banker, but he might as well have been the nation's central nervous system. If the US government was short on cash, he loaned it to them with interest. He bailed out the economy in 1895 and then practically owned it. You wouldn't recognize his face, but you'd recognize the ripple effect of every decision he made. Your pay docked, your rent raised, your job outsourced to the kid down the street who'd do it for 2 cents less. Morgan was so rich he had his own personal art gallery, complete with security guards and marble floors. You're lucky if you can afford a pack of matches. These men were powerful, yes. Smart, absolutely. But fair, don't kid yourself. They believed in social Darwinism, that the strong deserve to survive, and the weak, well, the weak should learn to work harder or accept extinction. It's not personal, they'd say, it's just economics. And if you pointed out that the deck was rigged, they'd point to their own success and say, then be better. You see their names carved into the city's skin. Carnegie Hall, Rockefeller Plaza, Morgan Library. They're everywhere. Their legacies shine. Yours? If you're lucky, your name gets scribbled on a shipping ledger. If you're really lucky, someone remembers to spell it right. The bosses at your level aren't exactly saints either. The foreman at your factory has a switch he keeps just outside his coat pocket. It's not for show, it's for the late, the lazy, or the unlucky. He walks the floor like a shark, eyes scanning for mistakes. Step out of line and you're docked. Talk back and you're gone. Need to pee? Better hold it or sprint. No time for biology when there are deadlines to meet. And yet somehow the bosses always act like they're the ones under pressure. Companies struggling, they say, as they install a new phonograph in their office. We can't afford to raise wages, they mumble, while slipping gold watches onto their wrists. You hear it every week. The company can't afford your raise, but it can afford new drapes. Some workers try to cozy up to the boss, hoping for a promotion. Maybe become a line supervisor. Maybe get off the floor and into a room with windows. It works, sometimes. But often those guys just end up hated by everyone else, stuck in a limbo where the rich won't accept them and the poor don't trust them. You've seen a few fall hard, pushed out when they got too comfortable. No one cries when they leave. There are whispers about organising again, about not just a strike, but a movement. People talk about the Knights of Labour, the AFL, the unions gaining steam in Chicago and St. Louis. You've seen posters with bold slogans. An injury to one is an injury to all. Sounds good, sounds brave, but the bosses don't take kindly to solidarity. They've got spies, informants, and the ever-looming threat of blacklisting. If your name goes on the wrong list, you'll never work in this city again. Still, it simmers. Anger. Hunger. The quiet fire behind every hunched back and blistered hand. You can feel it in the way people stop laughing at the boss's jokes. The way the older men nod when someone speaks out. The way you, even with everything to lose, start to believe maybe things could be different. But the bosses have all the power. They write the rules, own the buildings, pay the police, and drink wine from goblets worth more than your family's combined possessions. They are not just rich, they are untouchable. And when you ask why things are the way they are, someone always says, that's just the way the system works. Like it was handed down from the sky, carved into stone by God himself. Funny thing though, even systems can crack. And somewhere deep down behind all the grime and calluses, you can feel the pressure building. Historical fact. The term robber baron was popularised in the late 19th century to describe industrialists and financiers who used exploitative practices to amass wealth while crushing competition and workers' rights. Quirky fact, J.P. Morgan had a famously large purple vein-covered nose due to a skin condition called rhinophyma. He refused to be photographed and paid newspapers not to print unflattering images. Ongoing debate. Some historians argue that men like Carnegie and Rockefeller were captains of industry advancing America's economy. Others insist their wealth was built on unethical practices and brutal labour exploitation. $1 a day. That's what you earn if you're lucky. If the machines don't break down, if the boss doesn't decide to shave your hours for efficiency, and if you manage to clock in without being 2 minutes late because of a wagon jam or a twisted ankle on the cobblestones. A single wrinkled, sweat-dampened dollar. You hold it in your hand like it might suddenly multiply, but of course it doesn't. It just stares back at you. A lonely scrap of paper with more control over your life than God. Let's break it down. First, there's rent. That tenement room you share with your family. The one where you sleep in shifts and hang laundry across the ceiling like jungle vines. That's 40 cents, sometimes 50 if the landlord's feeling greedy. Or if he improves the building by replacing one broken step. Doesn't matter that it's still a fire trap. He tells you it's upgraded, and up goes the rent. Then there's food. Bread's cheap, sure, but you eat a lot of it because it's the only thing that fills you up. Flour, beans, potatoes, bulk items that get you through the week. Vegetables if they're soft enough to be marked down, and meat if someone's celebrating or the butcher slips you a scrap out of pity. Milk, you wish. It's watered down and costs a day's wages if you want it unspoiled. Sometimes your dinner is literally just a piece of bread rubbed with garlic. Poor man's feast, your mother calls it, trying to make it sound like a joke. You put aside pennies for coal, just enough to keep the stove alive in winter so you don't freeze to death in your bed, or rather, on the floor. You patch your clothes with whatever you can find. Old flour sacks make good aprons. A worn-out coat gets passed down until it's more thread than fabric. And still, somehow, even when you cut every corner, the math never works. You try to save, you really do. Maybe a few cents here and there in a tin can under the mattress. But then someone gets sick, or the price of onions jumps, or a neighbour's child dies and there's a funeral collection going around, and of course you give, because you all survive together or not at all. So your savings disappear again, swallowed up by life's endless emergencies. That dollar also has to cover your tools. The factory doesn't provide gloves, boots or aprons. If you break a hammer, you buy a new one. If your boots wear through, you stuff paper inside until it rains, then you just deal with it. You've learned to be inventive. You once made a belt out of an old curtain tie. Not comfortable, but it held your pants up, and that's what matters. There's no room for luxury, no entertainment budget, no treat-yourself purchases. You hear about people going to the theatre or buying books, but that's fantasy. If you want a story, you listen to your neighbour talk about the time he saw Buffalo Bill in a parade 10 years ago. If you want music, someone hums in the stairwell. You make do with scraps of beauty, like watching the sunset over the rooftops or finding a perfectly shaped button in the gutter. And yet every day you work like you're earning a fortune. You sweat, bleed, and limp through your shift with the same intensity as a banker balancing ledgers in a top hat. Because to you that dollar is a fortune, just not one that lasts. It disappears as fast as it comes. Sometimes you barely remember getting paid. The money slips from your hand to someone else's so fast it feels like a magic trick gone wrong. You start to see the world in terms of coins. A broken window, that's 5 loaves of bread. A new coat, 2 weeks of dinners. When you buy soap, you feel guilty. Cleanliness is a privilege. You dream about the day you could go a whole week without thinking about money, but you might as well dream of flying. The worst part, you're not even the lowest on the ladder. Some folks make less than $1, especially women and children. Women get paid half, maybe less, for the same work, and they don't complain because complaining gets you fired. You see mothers hunched over sewing machines with babies in their laps, stitching and rocking at the same time, praying the foreman doesn't notice either. And it's not just the pay, it's the power. That dollar doesn't buy you respect, it doesn't buy protection. You're still the bottom of the heap, and the people above you make sure you remember it. You've been shouted at for standing in the wrong place, cursed out for asking for your wages on time, laughed at when you asked about a raise. You get used to swallowing your pride, chewing on it like the last crust of bread in your pocket. Yet for all its cruelty, that dollar is sacred. You hold on to it with the same reverence others reserve for wedding rings or family heirlooms. It's a symbol that you survived the day, that the factory didn't chew you up entirely. You earned that dollar. You paid for it with your skin, your time, your childhood, and tomorrow you'll do it again. Historical fact. In the late 1800s, many unskilled labourers in urban factories earned between $1 and $1.50 for a 12-to-2 14-hour workday, with women and children often earning significantly less. Quirky fact, some workers couldn't afford wallets and kept their wages in hollowed-out buttons or hidden hems stitched into their clothing to prevent theft on crowded streets. Ongoing debate. Economic historians still discuss whether these low wages were appropriate for the time or artificially suppressed by the monopolistic business practices and an oversupply of desperate labour. By now, you've probably figured out that your job isn't exactly the safest gig in town. In fact, on most days, it feels like the building is actively trying to kill you. And if it's not the building, then it's the equipment, the boss, the weather. Or just plain rotten luck. You wake up with pain, work through worse pain, and go to bed wondering what kind of pain tomorrow has in store. There's no hazard pay, no accident report, and no sympathy. You get hurt? That's on you. Should have been quicker, smarter, less human. Take your workplace, for instance. It's one giant, whirring death trap. Gears spin faster than your eyes can follow. Belts snap without warning. Loose clothing? That'll get caught and drag you in before anyone can say hold on. You've seen it happen. More than once. 1 second a guy's yelling about getting extra shifts. The next he's on the ground, clutching a bloody stump where his hand used to be. The machine doesn't stop, not even for blood, and the floors, don't get started on the floors, slick with oil, water, and whatever chemical cocktail management thinks is necessary to keep things running. One wrong step and you're down. If you're lucky, you just bruise your hip. If you're not, your head hits the iron pipe behind you and it's lights out for good. They don't put up safety signs or fences. That would cost money. Instead, you rely on the veteran worker next to you to shout warnings now and then, like a tour guide in a haunted house. Don't step there. Watch your hand here. Don't lean back or you'll hit the belt. And then there's fire. Always fire. Factories are hot boxes stuffed with flammable materials. Cloth, oil, wood, dust. You'd think dust would be harmless, but no. One spark and the air itself can ignite. There's no fire alarm system, just people screaming. Once the flames start, it's every man for himself. Doors are usually locked from the outside so nobody sneaks out for a break, and windows are sealed or too high to reach. You've seen newspaper stories about fires. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, for instance. Over 100 people died in that one, mostly women, trapped like rats. Their only choice was to burn or jump. Many jumped. And what happens after? Not much. Maybe the newspapers get huffy for a week or two. Maybe someone's cousin testifies in court, but the bosses walk away. Insurance pays them out. The families get a small funeral and a long silence. Life goes on. Production resumes. Another shift starts the next day like nothing happened. You carry scars. Everyone does. You keep them under your sleeves, under your collar, hidden where you can, but they're there. Burns from the furnace, blisters from the press. A gash above your eyebrow from when a crate tipped over and cracked you across the head. You didn't go to a doctor, couldn't afford to. You just pressed a cloth to it, winced for a few days, and kept working. The body is just another tool here. When it breaks, you patch it. When it shatters, you replace it. Your lungs ache most days, probably from the dust, or maybe the fumes from whatever's cooking in the back of the factory, some solvent that stings your eyes and tastes like metal when you breathe. You've got a cough that won't quit, so do most of the others. It's called the shop cough, like it's a rite of passage. You just accept it, like bad lighting and missing lunch. You don't get time off to rest. If you don't show up, you're replaced. And still, you keep showing up. Because what's the alternative? There's no social security, no workers' comp. If you lose a leg, congratulations, you just became a burden to your family. Some people try to get by with odd jobs after an injury, selling pencils, shoe shining, begging. The world is not kind to the damaged. Even outside the factory, danger follows you. Construction jobs. You're working 40 feet up with no harness and no guarantee the scaffolding wasn't built by someone who'd skipped breakfast. Mines? Don't even ask. Men vanish into the earth and come back changed. If they come back at all. Railroads? You might spend a day laying track and your last moment being turned into paste by a runaway train. Pick your poison. And yet, somehow you keep going. Not because you're fearless, but because you don't have a choice. You learn to watch your step. You memorize the creaks of the floor and the timing of the machines. You keep your head down and your reflexes sharp. You flinch when you hear a crash, but not too much. Don't want the foreman thinking you're jumpy. Sometimes you joke about it with the others. You say things like, "At least if I die, I won't have to pay rent next week." Or, "If I lose another finger, I can finally quit playing piano." No one's actually playing piano. It's the defense mechanism, humor as armor. You wonder what it must be like to work somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. A bank maybe, or a shop where you fold clothes and ring up customers. Those people still get paid, don't they? They still eat. You wonder if you missed some fork in the road, took the wrong path. But then again, there probably wasn't a fork to begin with. Just the straight track from birth to labour to death. You wrap your injuries at night. Rags soaked in vinegar. Ointments made from herbs and hope. Your mother knows a few remedies passed down from her mother, who lived and died in another country, another life. You whisper thanks to her while she dabs at your bruises, even when her own hands are swollen from scrubbing floors all day. She hums while she works, like everything's fine. It's not. But it's enough to get you through. Historical fact. In 1882 alone, over 30,000 workers died from industrial accidents in the United States. Safety regulations were almost non-existent during the Gilded Age, and employers rarely took responsibility. Quirky fact. Some workers in matchstick factories developed a condition known as phossy jaw, where white phosphorus exposure caused their jawbones to rot. The factories kept using it anyway, because it was cheap. Ongoing debate. Scholars continue to debate whether the era's rampant industrial accidents were an unavoidable consequence of rapid growth, or a sign of willful negligence by employers focused solely on profits. You wake up with a fever, not a little sniffle, not a scratchy throat. No, this is the kind of fever that makes the world sway when you sit up. Your skin is clammy, your teeth ache, and your head feels like it's full of hot bricks. You groan and close your eyes, hoping it's a bad dream. It isn't. The sun's already up and the factory whistle just screamed. You've got exactly 3 minutes to decide. Show up sick or don't show up at all and risk never being allowed back. You already know the answer. You drag yourself up, shivering in your thin shirt, and start getting dressed. There's no hot tea waiting, no cosy blanket, no concerned doctor with a fancy moustache. There's just the same stiff trousers, the same patched boots, and your mother frowning in the corner knowing full well what you're doing and unable to stop you. "Don't stay out in the wind," she says softly, placing your lunch bundle in your hand like she's sending you off to war. In a way she is. Sick days don't exist. Not here. Not for people like you. Maybe in an office somewhere, where men sit behind desks and push papers with clean hands, someone can take a day to recover. But at the mill you show up or you're out. And once you're out, good luck finding another job, especially when everyone in the neighbourhood knows you're unreliable. So you walk, fever burning behind your eyes, legs weak and stiff. The city feels extra loud today. Horses snort, wagons rattle, street vendors shout. Your skull vibrates with every step. You nearly trip over a loose cobblestone and catch yourself on a lamppost, drawing a glance from a passing woman who wrinkles her nose and picks up her skirt. To her, you're just another drunk, if only. At the factory, you force yourself through the kids. The foreman looks at you once, just a glance, and says nothing. No, you're right. No, go home. Just a nod to your station. You start your shift like always. Muscles heavy, body begging you to sit down. You don't. You can't. The machine doesn't slow down just because you're sick. In fact, it somehow feels faster today, like it's mocking you. You press and pull, your hands slick with sweat, your sleeves soaked before noon. You breathe through your mouth to keep from coughing into the fabric and drawing attention. You've seen people remove mid-shift before. Too slow, they said. You know what that really meant. Too sick to be profitable. The others notice. One guy, Sam, nudges you and says, "You look like death." You try to smile, but it's more of a grimace. He hands you a rag dipped in cold water, and you press it to your neck. It helps for maybe a minute. Then it's back to survival. By lunch, you're dizzy. You stumble toward the alley behind the loading dock, sit down hard on a crate and hold your head between your knees. Your bread sits untouched. Even if you wanted to eat, your stomach's doing somersaults. You suck on a piece of salt to keep from throwing up. It's an old trick. Tastes like seawater and metal. You don't care. Someone passes you a sip of something strong, whiskey, maybe. It burns going down, but it clears your head a little. Just enough to get you standing again. You wipe your face, pat your cheeks, and march back in. You could be dying, but you don't stop. Why? Because you've seen what happens to those who do. Like old Tom, who used to work the dye vats. Came down with a cough 1 week, stayed home 2 days, showed up on the third to find someone else at his station. No warning, just gone. You saw him last week begging outside the church, one leg wrapped in newspaper, muttering about poison in his lungs. There's no safety net here. No health insurance, no clinics for the working poor. You'd need money for medicine, and the best you can hope for is a bottle of cough syrup from the corner shop, which, rumour has it, is mostly alcohol and chloroform. You've taken it before. It knocks you out good and hard, sure, but you wake up feeling like someone hit you with a brick. Still better than nothing. If you're lucky, you know someone who knows a midwife or an herbalist. A woman who mixes tinctures from roots and tells you to boil garlic and breathe in the steam. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But at least they'll look you in the eye and ask what's wrong, which is more than you get from anyone with a title or a salary. You think about resting, just one day, just 24 hours to sleep, to sweat it out under a blanket, to let your body fight back. But rest is expensive. Every hour not working is a handful of coins you'll never get back. And there are mouths to feed, yours included. So you keep going. You lose track of the afternoon. At one point you black out for a second, just long enough to stop moving, just long enough to get a look from the boss. He frowns, opens his mouth, and you brace for it. But someone behind you yells that the press is jammed and the moment passes. You breathe. When the whistle finally blows, you stagger out into the twilight like a ghost. You're not even sure you made it. You lean against a wall for a second, catching your breath. Sweat freezing on your skin. You look down at your hands. They're still there. Somehow you didn't lose any parts. You're still alive. You walk home slowly, each step an act of defiance. You're burning up, starving, shaking, but you're still moving, because what else is there? Historical fact, during the Gilded Age, the United States had no federal health regulations for industrial workers. Most companies did not provide medical care, and sick employees were often immediately replaced. Quirky fact, a popular over-the-counter medicine of the era, called to Kilmer's swamp root, promised to cure everything from kidney failure to nervous breakdowns. It was essentially flavoured alcohol with a dash of opium. Ongoing debate. Scholars debate whether the lack of workplace protections was due to ignorance of medical science or a calculated choice by industrialists to avoid the cost of employee well-being. You'd be amazed how many people in your neighbourhood have a side hustle. Not because it's trendy, but because working a full-time job for 12 hours a day still leaves you poor and desperate. So you get creative. After work, on your only day off, or even during lunch if you're fast and sneaky enough, you find something, anything that might bring in a few extra coins. And yeah, sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's not, but survival doesn't care about the law, and neither do your empty pockets. Let's say you're lucky, and your side gig is halfway respectable. Maybe you shine shoes, set up on a street corner with a little wooden box and a rag soaked in polish so old it smells like turpentine. You crouch for hours, brushing grime off the boots of bankers and clerks, hoping they toss a nickel instead of just muttering thanks and walking away. Or maybe you sell papers, shouting headlines until your voice gives out, chasing people down with rolled-up copies of The Sun and the World, hoping they give you a penny instead of just stealing one while you're distracted. Some people draw. You've seen kids barely 10 years old making charcoal sketches of dogs and babies offering portraits for a dime. The talent is real, but nobody has time for art in a city where everyone's in survival mode. Unless, of course, you can charm the right people, wealthy passers-by who think your starving genius routine is charming. Play your cards right and they'll pay for a sketch of their bulldog. Get too bold, though, and they'll report you for loitering. Then there's the seamstresses. After their factory shifts, the women go home, light a candle, and stitch until midnight. Dresses, shirts, handkerchiefs, anything someone might buy at the market. They make a few extra cents per piece, which sounds okay, until you realise they're working for hours and pulling in barely enough to afford a loaf of bread. Still, it's something, and sometimes it's the only thing that lets a family survive another week. Of course, the lines blur quickly. Some people turn to less sanctioned opportunities. Your buddy Charlie runs dice games in the alley behind the bakery. It's all hush-hush until someone wins too much or someone else loses their week's pay. Then a fight breaks out and the cops get called. Not that the cops care about gambling. Not really. They just care about getting their cut. Everything in this town works on a system of invisible tolls. There's the guys who deal in second-hand goods, which is code for stuff they definitely didn't buy. Watches, shoes, jewellery, sometimes even canned food if they hit the right wagon at the right time. You buy it cheap, resell it cheaper, and if nobody asks questions, everybody walks away happy. You know it's stolen, so does the buyer, but again, morality gets flexible when rent's due. Then there are the bootleggers. Not booze, not yet, that'll come later, but medicine. You'd be shocked how many folks are brewing their own cough syrup in bathtubs, spiked with homemade alcohol and whatever herbs they think might work. Some of it's harmless, some of it cures nothing and just gets you drunk, and some of it straight up kills people. But if you're sick and broke, what else do? You take what you can find, pray it doesn't stop your heart, and hope you feel better by morning. And let's not forget the pickpockets. They're the bottom feeders of the street's economy, but weirdly respected in some circles. It takes skill, after all. You've seen kids who can slip a coin purse from a lady's belt without so much as brushing her coat. You're not proud of it, but you've tried it once, maybe twice, just to see if you could, you couldn't. Your conscience wasn't the problem, your technique was. One sharp-eyed grocer gave you a glare that made you sweat for 3 blocks straight. Some side gigs are more personal. You've heard whispers about women renting out a room for the night to men with coin to spare. Not always because they want to. Sometimes it's the only way to feed a child, keep the lights on, or buy medicine. Nobody talks about it out loud, but everyone knows someone. It's understood. Not judged, not praised. Just another ugly truth everyone's learned to walk around. And it's not just adults. Kids hustle too. Selling gum on corners, offering to carry coal buckets, dancing for coins on busy sidewalks. One boy on your street pretends to be blind to earn more. He keeps one eye half closed, stumbles a little, and always carries a tin cup. You admire the act more than you should. Not because it's honest, but because it works. You've tried a few side gigs yourself. Once you sang in front of a bar after work, just for kicks. You only knew 2 verses of the song, but some drunk tossed you a dime, and for 5 minutes you felt like a celebrity. Another time you offered to fix boots, even though you'd never done it before. The stitching came out crooked, and the guy hit you with the boot afterward. But hey, you tried. And that's the thing. Everyone's trying. No one's just lazy or shiftless like the newspapers like to claim. You work one job to survive. You work a second to almost live. The real dream? Finding something, anything, that gets you a little higher, a little closer to safety. You don't need luxury, you just want breathing room. And maybe, just maybe, a day off where you don't have to hustle at all. Historical fact, during the Gilded Age, many working-class Americans took on informal jobs to survive. From sewing and shoemaking to gambling and illicit trading, this was especially common in urban immigrant communities. Quirky fact, in some tenement neighbourhoods, families trained parrots to shout sales pitches out the sill window, fresh eggs, good boots, to help attract customers to their small home-run businesses. Ongoing debate. Some historians argue that these side hustles were a form of economic empowerment. Others point out they were symptoms of a system that failed to provide adequate wages or job security. The boat smells like sweat, salt and fear. You've been below deck for nearly 2 weeks, crammed shoulder to shoulder, with strangers who speak 100 different dialects but all wear the same look. Tight-jawed hopefulness tinged with barely hidden panic. The food is bad, the water is worse, and the air feels like it hasn't been changed since the ship was built. But still you made it. Because on the horizon is America, the land of streets paved with opportunity, or so they said. You arrive in the city like a ghost coming ashore, pale, thin, eyes squinting against the industrial haze. Everything is bigger than you imagined. The buildings tower, the crowds surge, and the language slams against your ears like a fist. You don't speak much English, maybe a phrase or two, but enough to know when someone's calling you a name. You smile anyway. What else can you do? Your first stop is Ellis Island, and that's no cakewalk. The inspectors look you over like your livestock, checking your eyes, your teeth, your pabubas. One man gets turned away because of a cough, another because he limps. You clench every muscle, willing yourself to look healthy, useful, normal. You pass, barely up, and just like that, you're stamped and shuffled into a new world. Finding work isn't hard. Finding decent work is impossible. You're immediately funneled into the lowest rung, whatever job no one else wants. Factories, sweatshops, loading docks, slaughterhouses. They pay you less because you're new, foreign and desperate. You say yes to everything. You lift things you probably shouldn't. You nod even when you don't understand the question. The bosses love it. They call you cheap labour like it's a compliment. You live in the same tenement blocks as everyone else. The other newcomers, Irish, Italian, Polish, Jewish, Chinese, Russian, German. Every floor a different language, every kitchen a different smell. Sometimes that causes friction. People grumble, spit out slurs, blame each other when wages drop or fights break out. But most of the time you coexist. You trade bread for pickles, learn to curse in 5 languages, and slowly start to understand that you're all in the same drowning boat. Your name changes, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design. The clerk at the immigration desk couldn't spell it, so now it's shorter. Americanized. Easier for people to yell when they want you to mop something. You hang on to the old name in your head. It still echoes in your mother's voice when she tucks you in at night, though now she's back in the old country, and you're here, working to send her coin she'll never hold. Sundays are when the homesickness hits hardest. You go to church or temple, or just sit by the river and stare out at the grey sky, pretending it's the one you left behind. Letters take weeks to arrive, if they come at all. Photos are rare and precious. One smudged picture of your family becomes your most prized possession. You show it to no one. It feels like a secret, proof that you didn't imagine your old life. You try to hold on to your culture. You cook the old recipes, wear the old clothes until they fall apart, sing the old songs under your breath at work. But the pressure to blend in is constant. If you talk funny, they laugh. If you dress differently, they stare. So slowly, piece by piece, you change. You switch your shirt buttons left to right. You cut your hair. You stop using so to uncertain words. You become more American, whatever that means. But even if you do everything right, you're still an outsider. You're called names. Greenhorn, Dago, Kike, Chink, Mick, Bohunk. You pretend not to care. You pretend not to hear. You pretend a lot. You tell yourself it's temporary, that someday your children won't have accents. They'll go to school, wear clean shoes, and unpronounce them without thinking about it. Maybe they'll forget where they came from. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe not. Some immigrants stick close to their own kind. Little Italies, Chinatowns, Polish corridors, neighbourhoods that become miniature versions of the homeland. Here, you can speak freely, buy familiar food, and feel safe. But even inside the bubble, there's tension. Who's more respectable? Who's been here longer? Who's still eating with their hands? Everyone wants to climb the ladder, even if they have to step on each other to do it. Others try to break out. They change their names, bleach their hair, marry someone acceptable. It works, sometimes. But even when you dress the part, they still know. Your skin, your accent, your last name, they betray you. So you hustle. You prove yourself with calloused hands and quiet loyalty. You work harder than anyone else, take less, ask for nothing. Because you're afraid they'll throw you out, send you back, or worse, keep you here but remind you daily that you're not wanted. And yet, for all the cruelty, all the closed doors, something inside you refuses to give up. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's sheer spite. You send home whatever money you can. You teach your children both languages. You mark every holiday, even if it's just with a candle and a whispered prayer. You carve out your place inch by inch. You aren't the first, you won't be the last. But your struggle? It's specific, it's yours. It's stitched into the seams of your overcoat and pressed into the soles of your shoes. You're the heartbeat of a country that doesn't know what to do with you, except put you to work and hope you stay quiet. Historical fact. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States, many of whom settled in urban industrial centres where they faced exploitation and discrimination. Quirky fact, Some immigrants arriving at Ellis Island were so overwhelmed by the noise and unfamiliar customs that translators had to explain how to use indoor toilets. Many had never seen one before. Ongoing debate. Historians continue to explore whether assimilation into American culture was a survival strategy or a forced erasure of ethnic identity under systemic pressure. You show up to work one morning and something's different. The air feels heavier, and not just from the coal dust. People are whispering in corners, glancing toward the doors like they were expecting something. The foreman barks louder than usual, trying to keep everyone in line. But there's an energy building, something like fear mixed with defiance. You don't know what's going on at first, but by lunch, you hear the word that makes your stomach flip. Strike. It starts with the guys in the boiler room. One of them, big fellow, arms like fence posts, refuses to clock in after being shorted on last week's pay. Says he won't work until he gets what he's owed. Another man joins him. Then 3 more. Then someone from the sewing room walks off, shouting that her machine's been broken for 2 weeks and no one's fixed it. You watch, heart pounding, as people gather near the factory gates, arms crossed, jaws clenched. Strikes are not new. You've heard about them. Read about them in crumpled newspapers passed around the tenement steps. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they end in clubs and blood and headlines like, "Workers' riot, city in chaos." Still, you feel something you haven't in a long time, the sharp edge of hope. You're torn, you need the job, but you also need to breathe. You also need to stop living in fear of losing your fingers or being docked for coughing. So when your shift ends and you see the growing crowd outside, you don't run. You walk over, stand beside them, and cross your arms too. That's how it begins. The next day, the factory is closed. Not officially, of course. The company says it's a temporary maintenance delay. But the truth is, they're panicked. You're not just a disgruntled worker. You're part of something bigger now. A movement. A union. The talk turns serious fast. Meetings are held in church basements, in parks, even behind the butcher shop when it's quiet. People pass out flyers printed with ink that smudges your fingers. You learn words like collective bargaining and solidarity. You repeat slogans like 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. It feels good to say it out loud. Even better to hear 100 voices say it back. The leaders of the strike aren't polished politicians. They're men and women just like you, sleeves rolled, boots worn thin, faces tired but determined. Some are immigrants. Some were born 2 blocks from here. All of them have been pushed to the edge, and now they're pushing back. There's risk in every step. The factory owners call in Pinkertons, private security thugs with clubs and blank expressions. They stand near the gates with their arms crossed, daring anyone to make a move. The police show up too, but not for your protection. They're there to keep order, which really means making sure business isn't interrupted. You keep protesting. Then the company tries to divide you. They post signs offering bonuses to loyal workers who return to the job. They whisper promises, better hours, small raises. If you just walk away from the crowd and come back inside, tomorrow, a few do. You watch them go, faces turned from the crowd, backs hunched with guilt. You don't blame them. Everyone has their breaking point, but you don't go. Some nights the meetings get loud, people argue about strategy, about risk, about whether this is worth it. One guy wants to break windows, another says that'll ruin public support. A woman from the packing floor says she can't afford another week without pay. You all sit in the flickering candlelight and try to make decisions together. It's messy, slow, frustrating, but it's yours. And then one night someone throws a rock. Nobody knows who did it. Could have been a worker, could have been a hired agitator, someone paid to stir trouble and give the bosses an excuse. But the rock hits a Pinkerton in the shoulder, and chaos breaks loose. Clubs swing, screams echo, you run. You see your friend go down hard, blood on his collar. You duck into an alley, heart racing, eyes wide. The next day, the newspapers call you criminals. Mob violence shakes city. Workers turn lawless. They don't mention the strike's cause. They don't mention the unpaid wages, the injuries, the deaths that led to this moment. Just the broken windows and a photo of a brick. Suddenly, support gets thinner. People who nodded at you yesterday now cross the street. Stores won't sell on credit. Even your church hesitates to say your name from the pulpit. You start to feel that old fear creep back in, the kind of fear that tells you maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe you should crawl back and beg for your job. But then something amazing happens. The factory caves. Not completely, not cleanly, but they agree to meet, to talk. They promise repairs, fairer hours, and, most shocking of all, a wage increase. It's not perfect, it's not even close to what you asked for, but it's something, and in this world, something is a victory. You go back to work, head held a little higher. The machines still roar, the hours are still long, but you see the difference in the small nods exchanged across the floor, in the way people stand a little straighter. You learned something, you aren't alone, and when you stand together, people have to listen. You still work hard, still sweat, still ache, still dream of something better, but now you know you can fight, and next time, you'll be ready. Historical fact: the American Federation of Labor, AFL, founded in 1886, became one of the most powerful labour organisations during the Gilded Age, advocating for better wages, hours and working conditions. Quirky fact during strikes: some workers organised impromptu parades with homemade instruments and banners made from flour sacks to boost morale and visibility. Ongoing debate. Historians continue to debate the effectiveness of early Gilded Age labour strikes, whether they achieved lasting change or merely served as symbolic resistance against overwhelming economic power. There's a knock at the door, not the polite kind. This one's sharp, deliberate, echoing through the walls like a warning. Your mother freezes, mid-stir at the stove, and your brother drops the sock he was sewing. You all know that knock. It's not the neighbour. It's not a friend. It's the police, or something close enough that it doesn't matter. You open the door a crack and see the uniform first, then the face. Blank, bored, the kind of expression a man wears when he's already decided you're guilty. He asks for your name, then your brother's, then your father's. There's been a disturbance at the mill, he says, and they are asking questions. You try to explain that you weren't even there that day, that your father died 2 winters ago, that your brother was working double shifts at the rail yard. The officer shrugs, scribbles something in his little book, and tells you to stay available. No goodbye, no explanation, just a hard look and boots clomping back down the stairs. You close the door slowly, and for the next week, every sound in the hall makes your skin prickle. This is how it works in your part of town. The law doesn't show up to protect you. It shows up to check you, to remind you that the system is watching, listening, ready to step in the moment you step out of line. You're not seen as a citizen, you're a threat. A body with too many opinions, a name on a list, potential spark in a room full of dynamite. The police patrol your neighbourhood like they are in enemy territory. They don't walk the streets, they stomp them. Batons on their hips, hands resting casually on their revolvers. They say they're here to keep order, but you've seen what their version of order looks like. Cracked ribs, broken teeth and bruises that take weeks to fade. There's no paperwork, no trial, no justice. Just a warning glare and a quiet understanding that you'd better not cause trouble. You've seen friends dragged off for loitering, for spitting, for speaking their own language too loudly on the sidewalk. One man got arrested for standing outside a factory gate holding a sign that said, "We deserve better." Another got clubbed for trying to break up a fight between 2 drunk men on the trolley. He was the one who ended up in jail, black-eyed and limping. You don't call the police, even when someone's hurt, even when something's stolen. You handle it yourself or you ask a neighbour. There's a whole shadow system in place, quiet deals, borrowed tools, favours repaid with food instead of cash. It's safer that way. Involving the cops only brings questions, and those questions never end well for people like you. The prisons aren't much better. You've never been inside, but you know people who have. They come back thinner, harder, quieter. Some don't come back at all. Maybe they were innocent, maybe they weren't. Doesn't really matter. Once you're inside, the outside stops caring. You're gone. Forgotten. Just another body in a jumpsuit, another tally in a ledger. You hear stories, some whispered, some screamed, about men locked up for union organising, for speaking out at town halls, for writing the wrong thing in the wrong pamphlet. A journalist gets too bold, a factory worker talks too loud, a preacher gives the wrong sermon, and suddenly they're disturbing the peace. What peace, exactly? The peace of rich men never having to answer for anything? Even the judges seem handpicked from the same club. You get dragged into court and the man behind the bench already looks bored. He hears your accent, sees your calloused hands, and makes up his mind before you speak. If you're lucky, you get a fine. If not, it's a few weeks in lockup or forced labour on a work farm. The rich, of course, have lawyers. Whole teams of them with shiny watches and Latin phrases and friends in high places. You have the truth, and no one cares. Corruption isn't a secret. It's out in the open. Everyone knows which officers take bribes, which judges get kickbacks, which politicians shake hands with the factory owners behind closed doors. You hear about elections, but you have never seen a ballot. And even if you did, you're not sure your vote would count. Someone once joked that in this city, the only honest man is the one too poor to be bought. You're not sure if that's comforting or just depressing. Sometimes the system throws you a bone, a raid on a gambling den, a crackdown on unsafe housing, a surprise inspection at a sweatshop. It makes the papers, makes the mayor look good. But within a week, everything goes back to the way it was. The inspectors get paid to look the other way. The landlord pays a fine and raises the rent. The factory gets a fresh coat of paint and keeps breaking the same bones. Still, you resist, not loudly, not always in protest lines or picket signs, but in small, stubborn ways. You teach your kids to read, even if the school is falling apart. You help your neighbour fix his window when a cop smashes it by accident. You leave food for the widow upstairs whose son got locked up for stealing bread. You survive, and in doing so you refuse to disappear. Because deep down, you know something the system doesn't want to admit. You matter. You work the machines, lay the tracks, stitch the clothes, clean the floors. You keep the city running while they pretend it's all magic and money. Without you, it all stops, and maybe someday the people in charge will realise that. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just keep swinging clubs and handing out fines and smiling for photographs in their tailored suits. But even then, you'll still be here, watching, remembering, enduring. Historical fact: during the Gilded Age, law enforcement was often used to suppress labour unrest. Police and private security forces like the Pinkertons frequently acted on behalf of industrialists to break strikes and intimidate workers. Quirky fact: some prison systems in the 19th century rented out inmates for labour to private companies, a practice known as convict leasing. Many were forced to work in brutal conditions, especially in the South. Ongoing debate. Historians can tell you to debate whether Gilded Age policing was simply underdeveloped or intentionally structured to protect capital over community. Sunday is the only day you don't set an alarm in your head. The factory whistles are silent, the bosses sleep in, and the machines take their one collective breath. But you don't. You still rise early, mostly out of habit, partly because if you lie too long on the hard floor, your back locks up like an old hinge. But Sunday is different, and you feel it in the air. It's quieter, slower, a little less cruel. The first task is a bucket bath. Not for comfort, don't get wild, but because if you show up to church reeking of factory grease and garlic, the old women in the front row will glare holes through your soul. You heat water on the stove and carry it to the chipped tin basin in the corner of the room. There's a little bar of soap, whittled down to the size of a button, that everyone shares. The water's never hot enough. You grit your teeth and scrub anyway, careful not to soak the floorboards, which are already one damp patch away from inviting the ceiling below into your living room. Next is clothes. Not clean, nothing you own is clean, not really, but Sunday best. That means the least stained shirt, maybe the one with the buttons mostly intact. If you're lucky, you own one tie. It's fraying at the edges and you loop it awkwardly, the knot always just a bit crooked. Your shoes are scuffed, but you give them a quick rub with a cloth, then hope the sunlight doesn't hit them too directly. Looking put together is less about pride and more about dignity, one of the few things the world hasn't entirely stripped from you. Church is more than church. It's a checkpoint for the soul, a social hub, the week's only performance. You nod to people you recognise, neighbours, co-workers, old Mrs. Finnegan, from the top floor who always smells like lemon peel and cough drops. You all file into the same wooden pews, and for an hour or two you pretend things are fine. Better than fine. On Sundays, you're allowed to believe in heaven, or at least in a version of Earth that doesn't involve 12-hour shifts and mysterious rashes from the dye vats. The preacher, Father Connolly if you're Catholic, or Reverend Madsen if you're Protestant, or maybe Rabbi Levy if you're part of the tenements Jewish quarter, delivers a sermon that's more about survival than salvation. You listen to words like patience, perseverance, and reward beyond suffering, and they make a strange kind of sense when you're running on bread crusts and borrowed time. The sermon is a balm, not a cure, but something soft to press against the bruises of the week. Afterward, there's a brief moment in the churchyard where people linger. The women trade gossip in hushed voices, half-heartedly swatting at the children scurrying between them like restless pigeons. The men talk about work, unions, rumours of new bosses, new layoffs, new chances. Someone always claims to know a guy who knows a guy who's hiring. It's rarely true, but you listen anyway. Hope's a fragile thing. You learn not to poke it too hard. Back home, Sundtida means laundry. If you've got soap and water to spare, you boil shirts in a pot big enough to feed a family, scrubbing out coal dust and sweat stains with knuckles already raw from work. Then you wring everything out and hang it on the line strung across the room. It drips for hours, and the whole place smells like wet cloth and faint mildew. But for one brief moment, it feels like you're doing something right, something normal. And there's food. Not fancy, not rich, but slightly more thought out than usual. Maybe a stew with bones borrowed from the butcher, or thick slices of cabbage fried in lard. If the paycheck stretched just far enough, maybe even a small dessert, a slice of apple if someone traded for it, or a bit of molasses on bread. You eat slow on Sundays, not because there's more food, but because there's finally time to taste it. The afternoon is sacred in its own quiet way. You might read if you're lucky enough to own a book, or borrow one, or know someone who reads out loud. The newspapers get passed around, stories read in broken accents, mispronounced headlines still managing to carry weight. The kids play with whatever they can find, bottle caps, marbles, chalk. You listen to them laugh, and it sounds like the world is healing, even if just for a second. There's also visiting. You go see the family 2 floors up whose son just got out of the hospital, or the woman whose husband vanished after the last factory layoffs. You bring a crust of bread or just company. You don't ask for anything. You just sit, drink weak tea and talk. Sometimes that's enough. And maybe, if the weather's kind and your feet aren't throbbing too badly, you walk. Just to feel like a person again. You stroll past the parks where children chase each other, in clothes too big for them, past street musicians playing songs that sound like home, past shop windows full of things you can't afford but like to look at anyway. You pretend for a block or two that this is your city too. Evening creeps in with that familiar tug of anxiety. You start thinking about Monday, about the foreman's temper, the machines, the list of things you didn't get done. The Sabbath peace has an expiration date, and it's always too short. Still, you hang on to it. You sit a little longer at the table. You light a candle, not for prayer, but for softness. You let the silence linger. Your mother hums a lullaby from the old country. The kids nod off in corners. You fold your hands, not in piety, but in exhaustion. Tomorrow the grind resumes, but tonight you breathe. Historical fact, during the Gilded Age, Sunday was often the only day of rest for working-class Americans, and church attendance was as much a social obligation as a spiritual one, especially among immigrant communities. Quirky fact, some tenement dwellers use Sunday clothes not just for church, but to take stage photographs in borrowed suits and dresses, often returning the garments the same afternoon. Ongoing debate. Scholars disagree on whether religious institutions during the Gilded Age empowered the working class through community building, or helped pacify them by encouraging acceptance of suffering as divine will. You sit at the dinner table, really just a wooden crate with a towel thrown over it, and stare down at your plate like it might betray you. It's holding something vaguely meat-shaped, steaming suspiciously, and smothered in a sauce that's doing its best to distract from the smell. Your sister eyes her own plate with equal suspicion. Across the table, your little brother pokes his food with a fork, then looks at you like he's considering whether to eat it or keep it as a pet. This is what food looks like in the Gilded Age when you live on the bottom rung. Not golden brown roasts or warm pies cooling in the window. It's meat from a can with a label so faded it might have been printed during the Civil War. It's bread that's more crust than crumb. It's milk that's gone from liquid to yogurt without your permission. And sometimes, when you're real lucky, it's a stew with enough potatoes to convince your stomach it's full. You know what hunger is. Not the missed lunch kind, real hunger. The kind that makes your head light and your stomach feel like it's trying to punch its way out. The kind that makes you lie awake at night fantasizing about butter. You've seen your mother skip meals because she's not hungry, when you know exactly what that means. She's giving you her share, you never say anything. But you always eat slower when she does that, hoping maybe she'll take a bite. Food is currency in this world. An apple is a luxury. An egg is a gift. Meat is rare, and fresh meat, practically a miracle. So most of the time you eat what's available: bread, cabbage, beans. You can stretch a head of cabbage for a week if you boil it into soup, and you do, over and over. You've had cabbage so many ways that you start assigning it moods. Angry cabbage, bored cabbage, funeral cabbage. And when it's not food from the kitchen, it's food from the street. Vendors shout from carts, hawking meat pies and sausages for pennies. They smell incredible. You give in sometimes, trade a nickel for a hot bite wrapped in yesterday's newsprint. You don't think too hard about what's in it. Nobody does. The less you ask, the happier your stomach is. But sometimes your stomach should ask. Because Gilded Age food isn't just suspicious, it's downright dangerous. No regulations, no labels, no health codes. The milk might be diluted with chalk or formaldehyde to keep it fresh. Your sausage could contain beef, pork, rat, or a combination thereof. Bread gets whitened with alum. Pickles are green because someone added copper sulfate. It looks good, so people buy it, then get sick 3 hours later and wonder if it was the food or the air. The truth is, half the time you're not just fighting poverty, you're fighting poison. You remember the first time your brother got sick after eating discount meat? It was from a local shop that sold cuts from the back room. No labels, no promises, just cheap. It looked fine, smelled fine. But by midnight, he was curled up on the floor, pale and shaking. You didn't have money for a doctor, so your mother gave him charcoal water and prayed. He lived, but you never bought meat from that shop again. It shut down 2 weeks later, only to reopen under a different name, same butcher, new sign. That's how it works. Everything's disposable, including trust. Even water isn't safe. Some tenement buildings have wells so shallow that runoff from the street seeps in. Others rely on cisterns that collect more pigeon droppings than rain. You boil it when you can. When you can't, you drink and hope. Some people add vinegar or lemon to clean it. Others just hold their breath and gulp. The rich don't drink this water. They have private wells or buy imported mineral water in glass bottles. You see them sipping it in restaurants with linen napkins. You drink from a tin cup that leaves a metallic taste in your mouth and hope it won't kill you. The funny part, the rich read about your food and find it exotic. They buy immigrant cookbooks, trying to replicate dishes they've never tasted in real life. They think it's charming, authentic. They don't know that your potato stew was invented not by chefs, but by necessity. That your family recipe is really just the only thing your grandmother knew how to make with 4 ingredients and a bent knife. Sometimes the people around you try to make it fun. Your neighbour has a trick for turning scraps into dumplings. Your mother tells you stories while she stirs the pot, turning cabbage soup into a fairy tale. You all act like it's a feast, like this watery meal is the highlight of the week. It's theatre. Survival as performance. You clap for her efforts and scrape the bowl clean. Then there are food fads. You hear about miracle tonics and health crackers sold in tins with fancy labels. They promise everything from glowing skin to longer life. Most of them taste like chalk. Some are just sugar, one is basically flavoured heroin, but nobody knows that yet. People drink it because they want to believe something out there is good for them. You've learned not to believe, you just chew. Still you dream. You pass bakery windows and imagine biting into fresh buttery rolls. You catch a whiff of roasted peanuts and think someday. On the rare occasion when someone splurges, buys a pie or a whole roasted chicken, you remember every single bite. It becomes a benchmark, a story you'll tell for months. Remember that night we had real beef? You'll whisper in the dark and everyone will sigh like they're remembering a love affair. Because food in your world isn't just food. It's a hope, a bribe, a gamble. Sometimes it's a lie. But it keeps you going, and for now, that's enough. Historical fact. Before the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, American food products were virtually unregulated. Adulterated food and fake medicines were common, with little oversight and disastrous health consequences. Quirky fact, ketchup became popular in the Gilded Age not because it was tasty, but because it helped cover the spoiled flavour of rotting meat. People literally used it as a food survival tool. Ongoing debate. Some scholars argue that the food crisis of the Gilded Age helped catalyse the Progressive era's regulatory reforms. Others suggest those reforms came far too late for You Meet Her behind the dye works, under the creaky water tower, where the air always smells like vinegar and old socks. It's not romantic, not in the storybook sense, but it's quiet, and no one bothers you there. She works on the floor below yours, folding shirts for 12 hours a day with fingers so fast they look like sewing needles themselves. You don't talk much at first, just nods, shared looks, and that moment where she hands you a handkerchief when your nose won't stop bleeding from the fumes. That's how it starts. Love in the Gilded Age doesn't come with courtship dances and flowers. It comes in exhausted glances, stolen breaks, and letters scribbled on scrap paper. You learn someone not through conversation over tea, but by watching them survive. How they hold their breath around the foreman, how they step over the loose floorboard without looking down, how they never complain even when their feet are bleeding. It's not a poem. It's a bond forged in the furnace of labour. You sneak walks together after the shift. The streetlights are flickering. Gas-fueled and moody, casting long shadows on the cobbles. Your hands find each other, fingers, rough with calluses but warm. You talk about stupid things, how the factory dog only has 3 teeth, how the night shift workers think the building is haunted. Sometimes you don't talk at all. You just walk, breathing the same foul air, thinking the same quiet thoughts. But love doesn't pay the rent, and romance doesn't stop pregnancies, which is why you find yourself one morning in the hallway outside a tiny tenement room, pacing while she throws up into a bowl, pale as laundry soap. She looks up at you with a mix of fear and apology, and you already know. There's no test, no doctor, you just know. This wasn't the plan. Not now, maybe not ever. You both earn just enough to scrape by. You sleep on floors, you eat leftovers of leftovers. A baby. It feels impossible. But the world doesn't ask if you're ready. It just delivers. You weigh your options, what few there are. Marry quickly if you can afford the license. Hide the bump and hope no one asks questions. Pretend it's someone else's. Hope it's not twins. Some women try to handle things themselves, quietly, dangerously, with herbs or whispered instructions passed down through alleyway networks. But it's a brutal risk. You've seen it go wrong. You've seen the blood, the fever, the aftermath. If you do get married, congratulations. You now have a second person to starve beside. Maybe you move in with her family. 6 people in one room becomes 9. You hang a sheet between corners and call it privacy. The baby arrives in the same place it was conceived. Quietly, desperately, hopefully. Midwives come with boiling water, rags and nerves of steel, and if everything goes well, you end the night with a screaming child and a lifetime of worry. If it doesn't go well, you don't talk about it. People whisper. You nod politely, you bury the silence with work. Some couples try to prevent it all. They talk to a friend of a friend who knows a woman who sells preventative powders or French rubber goods. The language is vague, the instructions vaguer. Some of it works, some of it's pure nonsense. A sprinkle of quinine in water, a ritual with herbs. Some methods are downright medieval. None of it's guaranteed, and you risk more than embarrassment if you're caught. Contraception isn't illegal everywhere, but good luck convincing anyone of that when the police are kicking your door in. And yet people still fall in love, still get married, still have babies, because even here, even now, in a world where you can't afford dinner and your shoes have holes and you cough up soot before breakfast, people hope. They hope their children will have better. They hope their lives will stretch wide enough to hold more than pain. Some women manage it all. You see them pushing strollers made of wicker and wire, dragging toddlers to market with one hand while holding a job notice in the other. They're warriors in aprons, voices sharp as knives, hearts wrapped in steel. They love hard and protect harder. They make food out of nothing. They send their kids to school with patched clothes and the fiercest glare you've ever seen. You wonder if they ever sleep. Love here is rarely soft. It's made of fatigue and sacrifice, of whispered I love yous between work shifts, of scraped knees and missed dinners and too many promises broken by poverty. But it's real. It's the hand that helps you up when the machine cuts you. It's the note in your coat pocket when your cough keeps you home. It's the look across the dinner table when there's only one egg left, and she puts it on your plate. Sometimes you think about what it would be like to love without desperation, to have a wedding with cake instead of day-old bread, to buy a ring that doesn't come from a pawn shop, to hold a child without praying you'll be able to feed it. That kind of love exists, somewhere. You've seen it in novels, in the eyes of people who walk the clean sidewalks uptown. But here, in your world, love is a fight. And it's a fight worth having, because even in this cracked, crumbling city, even in these sweat-soaked buildings and overcrowded rooms, love grows like weeds in a sidewalk crack. Ugly, persistent, impossible. It's the one thing you can still have that the bosses can't tax, the landlords can't raise rent on, and the foreman can't dock your pay for. You cling to it, even when it hurts. Historical fact, during the Gilded Age, access to contraception was limited and controversial. The Comstock laws of 1873 made it illegal to distribute birth control information or devices through the mail. Quirky fact, some working-class couples used early forms of love tokens, small carved coins or buttons passed between lovers in secret, often engraved with initials or messages. Ongoing debate. Scholars continue to discuss how Gilded Age poverty influenced family planning decisions, whether people had large families out of tradition or simply due to lack of options. She doesn't have time for speeches. She's too busy boiling potatoes, sweeping coal dust from under the stove, sewing buttons back onto shirts that don't really fit anyone, and holding the whole household together with whatever thread hasn't snapped yet. While the papers scream about strikes and robber barons, and the men on the factory floor grumble about hours and pay, she's in the background doing the kind of work that doesn't make headlines. but makes everything else possible. She's your mother, or your sister, or your wife, or your neighbour down the hall with 4 kids and a husband who disappeared into the mines last spring. Whatever her name is, her story is always the same. She does the invisible work, the unpaid labour, the survival choreography that no one rewards or even notices until it stops. She rises before anyone else. While the room is still dark and everyone's snoring in their shared corners, she's already stoking the fire, heating water, and slicing the last of the bread into pieces that might trick your stomach into feeling full. If there's milk, she pours just enough to make it stretch. If there's none, she says nothing, just hands you tea so weak it's more like a rumour of tea. And then, somehow, after feeding everyone, cleaning up and settling the youngest on a neighbour's lap, she leaves for her job. Maybe she works in the garment shop, bent over a machine that screams and shudders for 12 hours, while she stitches cuffs onto shirts she'll never be able to afford. Maybe she does laundry for a wealthier family across town, scrubbing out wine stains she's never tasted, smoothing lace that costs more than her monthly rent. Maybe she sells roasted peanuts at the market or watches someone else's children while praying hers stay out of trouble. Her pay, half what a man earns, if that. They say women are less productive, but she works harder than most of the men you know. She doesn't get sick days, she doesn't get respect, she barely gets lunch. But she shows up every day and still gets asked what she plans to do about dinner. When she gets home, it doesn't stop. There are mouths to feed, floors to scrub, clothes to mend. She reads notices from the landlord, translates them from English to her native tongue in her head, and calculates whether you can pay half the rent now and half next week without getting kicked out. She knows the butcher will give her bones if she asks nicely. She knows how to fix a window with flour paste and newspaper. She knows the midwife who charges less and the herbalist who won't ask questions. She hides money, a coin here, 2 there, tucked in a shoe sole behind a floorboard, inside a teapot no one ever uses, because she doesn't trust anyone. Not the bosses, not the banks, not the men who promise they're working on it. That hidden stash is her safety net for emergencies, which is funny because everything is an emergency when you live like this. She's also the reason the kids have shoes. They're too big maybe, or stuffed with wool, but they work. She's the reason your shirt has patches instead of gaping holes. The reason you had cough syrup last week when the fever hit, even if it tasted like turpentine and licorice. She keeps track of birthdays, boils water when the toilet backs up, and somehow finds a way to make dinner with 3 ingredients and a prayer. And yet, when people talk about the working man, they don't mention her. They don't see her blistered hands or the way she winces when she sits too fast. They don't think about her when writing laws or setting wages. She's not considered the breadwinner even though she's the one who slices it, serves it, and often goes without it. Even other women forget. The rich ones, those few with clean hands and white gloves, they organise ladies' charities, sewing circles, and moral uplift societies. They give speeches about improving the lower classes while sipping tea served by girls who are too tired to make eye contact. They mean well maybe, but they don't understand what it's like to live every day in service to a family that's 1 missed paycheck away from eviction. And yet she doesn't complain, not out loud. Maybe she sighs when no one's listening. Maybe she stares out the window too long some nights. Maybe she whispers her grandmother's name like a prayer before closing her eyes. But she doesn't stop. She keeps the peace between the children, puts her hand on your shoulder when you're too angry to speak, smacks your brother when he mouths off, then tucks him in that same night with the lullaby she learned before she could spell. She kisses your father on the cheek even when she's furious, even when he smells like sweat and missed opportunities. And if you ask her why she works so hard, why she gives so much, she might laugh. Or she might just shrug and say, because who else will? Sometimes the men at the union hall talk about power, about respect, about rising up. You wonder what would happen if she ever rose up. If she ever slammed a pot down and said enough. If she ever stopped rationing, sewing, softening the blows, cries that life delivers with such cruelty. You think the whole city might fall apart. But she won't, because she knows the stakes. She knows no one's coming to save her. So she saves herself, and all of you every single day. No speeches, no medals, just persistence. Historical fact, during the Gilded Age, over 20% of American women were in the workforce, many of them in low-paying factory, domestic or service jobs. Their labour, paid and unpaid, was essential to family survival. Quirky fact, some tenement women kept detailed household budgets in coded notebooks, often hiding them from husbands and landlords. These books tracked every penny with stunning precision. Ongoing debate. Historians continue to debate whether Gilded Age feminism centred too heavily on middle-class ideals, often neglecting the voices and realities of working-class women who bore the brunt of economic hardship. There's a man on the corner with a thick moustache and a suitcase full of promises. He's wearing a coat 2 sizes too clean for this neighbourhood, and he shouts with the confidence of someone who has never laid brick, sewn a hem or bled into his boots. "Cure-alls," he bellows. "Elixirs. Potions to restore your vigour, clear your mind and banish disease." You'd laugh, should laugh, but then he pulls a bottle from his bag, swirls the amber liquid inside, and swears on his dead mother it cured his own consumption. 10 cents, a small price for salvation. You know it's a scam, everybody knows. But the truth is, when your lungs feel like paper, and your bones ache from weeks of overwork, and the doctor down the block charges more than you earn in 2 days, sometimes hope in a bottle is the only thing you can afford. That's the kind of education the Gilded Age offers. Not arithmetic, not literature, but learning how to tell when someone's lying, and how to decide if it even matters. Your formal schooling ended sometime between your 8th birthday and your first factory shift. It wasn't that you didn't want to learn, it's that the coal bin didn't fill itself, and your family couldn't eat vocabulary words. So you left the classroom and entered the world of work, trading your reader for a wrench. You learned numbers the hard way, counting coins at the grocer, estimating minutes until your next break, measuring thread without a ruler. You know more about fractions than any schoolmaster because you've lived a life sliced into fragments. A quarter loaf of bread, half a day's wage, 1/3 of your pay docked for being late. Still, you want to learn. Most people do. It's just that time is a luxury you can't afford. You try though. You read signs, pamphlets, anything you can get your hands on. You practice your letters in the dirt behind the tenement. You memorize newspaper articles and try to say them out loud at dinner, like you're reporting the news. And if someone corrects your pronunciation, you listen. You always listen. The kids in your building are the same. They go to school when they can, for as long as they can. Some stay longer, their parents scraping by to keep them out of the mills for another year. Others drop out early, joining you on the floor by age 9. Education isn't about expanding the mind, it's about delaying starvation. Of course there are schools, cramped, loud and overcrowded. 1 teacher, maybe 2 for 60 kids. Desks bolted to the floor, chalkboards cracked. Windows that don't open. If you go, you sit still, keep quiet and try not to get swatted. You learn basic arithmetic, a little geography, and how to recite the alphabet with enough flair to impress someone who might offer you an apprenticeship. But history, science, literature? That's for the children of men with last names carved on buildings. Some neighbourhoods offer night schools, especially for immigrants. You go after your shift, eyes burning, hands still black from work. The room's lit by flickering gas lamps, and the teacher's voice is soft but determined. You sit beside people twice your age and trace letters like they're secret codes. It's humbling but also comforting. No one here is better than you. You're all trying, and that means something. And then there are the scams. Every week a new ad goes up on the corner wall. Be your own boss, learn phrenology and stays, or guaranteed riches with our postal course in accounting. You squint at the fine print, trying to decide if it's worth your last dime. Sometimes you bite. You send off a coin and wait for the envelope that never comes. Other times you get a stack of poorly typed pages that claim to teach you business skills, but really just give vague advice like work hard and be confident. Even in learning, the poor get cheated. Then there are the scientific types who want to educate you whether you asked for it or not. Men in spectacles who claim your skull shape proves your intelligence, that your ancestry makes you inferior, that your accent reveals your moral failings. You sit still while they speak, boiling inside, trying not to shout, because shouting gets you labelled angry, and angry people don't get hired. But for all the lies and barriers, knowledge still leaks in. You share what you learn. You teach your sister to read while peeling potatoes. You show your friend how to write his name so he can sign for his paycheck. You trace letters on the wall at night with a candle stub. You keep books, worn, borrowed, stolen, from friends who believe that reading can be a kind of revolution. Sometimes education comes from strangers. You overhear a banker explain compound interest while yelling at his clerk. You watch a machinist measure twice, cut once and file the metal edge just so. You listen when a retired soldier tells you how he built a latrine that didn't poison the river. You absorb everything like dry soil after rain. Because knowledge is power, not in the cliché way they put on banners, but in the real way, the dangerous way. Knowing how to read a contract means you can fight being swindled. Knowing basic medicine might save someone's life. Knowing history means you can spot when the same trick's being played again, and maybe call it out loud enough that someone else hears you too. Still, you don't kid yourself. You're not going to Harvard. You're not even getting a diploma. But maybe you'll be literate enough to teach your kids something better than stay alive. Maybe one day, your daughter will read a book without wondering how much it's worth melted down, and that thought alone keeps you learning. Historical fact. During the Gilded Age, public education expanded rapidly, especially in urban centres, but many working-class children still left school early due to financial pressures. Quirky fact. One popular self-education tool at the time was the McGuffey Reader, a series of primers filled with moral lessons and vocabulary drills. Billions of copies were printed and passed around. Ongoing debate. Some scholars argue that limited education kept the working class compliant, while others suggest informal learning networks played a major role in early labour, organising and social change. Saturday night arrives not with a whisper, but with a slow-building hum, like the pressure in a steam pipe just before it bursts. You feel it on the street corners, where the bootblacks are whistling louder, tapping their brushes like drums. You hear it in the music floating out from the saloons, the honky-tonk piano that sounds like it's about to fall apart, but somehow holds together through sheer enthusiasm. You smell it in the air, a mix of spilled beer, coal smoke, and hot pretzels roasting on pushcarts. For one night, the whole neighbourhood decides to pretend it isn't broken. You clocked out with barely enough energy to lift your boots, but that doesn't matter. You still have your feet, you still have your breath, and you've got 3 hours of freedom before sleep pulls you under like a stone. So what do? You live. First stop, the saloon. It's not glamorous. A basement with creaky stools, beer that tastes like something strained through old socks, and men packed shoulder to shoulder, all shouting over each other about nothing. But it's yours. You know the barkeep's name, he knows yours, and if you're short a nickel, he'll float you until next payday, especially if you've helped him move barrels once or twice. The first drink burns, the fifth one soothes, the third, that's the one that turns your co-worker from that guy who always smells like varnish into your best friend. You sing songs you only half know the words to. You slap the bar like it owes you money. You tell stories about the job, exaggerating every detail. The press was jammed all day? No, it nearly exploded. The boss yelled at you? No, you almost punched him in the face. It's all nonsense and everyone knows it, but that's the point. And then someone mentions vaudeville. You pull together enough coins and head across town with a few others, laughing like fools and dodging street vendors along the way. The theatre marquee is flickering, half the bulbs burnt out, but it still looks magical. Inside, you're greeted by a red curtain, a sticky floor, and a crowd buzzing with anticipation. The show is a beautiful mess. Jugglers drop their pins. Comedians make jokes that barely land but still earn cheers. A strong man lifts a barbell overhead and then flexes until his shirt pops open, half by design, half by poor stitching. And then there's the dancing girls dressed in feathers and fringe kicking their legs in dizzying unison. It's not scandalous, not really, but it's just racy enough to make the whole audience lean forward. You laugh, not because the jokes are brilliant, but because they're allowed. Because this is one of the only places in your world where no one's telling you to sit up straight or hurry along. Here, you can exhale. Outside the theatre, you're buzzing. Not just from the cheap beer, but from the feeling of having experienced something extra, something beyond survival. You watch the neon sign flicker and wonder if the girls on stage go home to a room like yours. Probably, but for 10 minutes they made you believe in glitter and music and light. And that's something. The streets are live now, kids run wild, chasing each other with sticks and shouting made-up rules for games that make no sense. A man with a harmonica plays a tune that makes a few couples dance in place. There's a guy selling roasted chestnuts from a metal bin, and they smell like heaven. You spend your last coin on one, crack the shell, and eat it slowly, like you're tasting gold. But it's not all joy. Around the corner there's a fight brewing. Two drunks argue over a spilled drink or a woman, or something neither of them will remember by morning. A cop walks by, looks for a second and keeps going. Not his problem. Not unless something breaks. And even then, maybe not. Further down, someone's singing old country ballads in a language you barely understand, but the tune sounds like home. You stop and listen. Just for a minute. Then someone grabs your arm and says there's a card game starting in the back of the butcher shop, and next thing you know, you're holding a hand of mismatched cards, pretending you know what you're doing. You lose, of course, but not by much. Eventually, the night winds down. You don't realise how tired you are until you start walking home. The streets are quieter now. The music's faded, the beer's worn off, and your feet ache like you walk to another state. But your chest feels lighter. For once, your heart isn't pounding from fear or exhaustion. It's just content. You step inside the tenement. The hallway smells like boiled cabbage and smoke, same as always. But you carry something new with you. The echo of laughter, the memory of a silly joke, the rhythm of a dance step you might try again next week. It's enough. You collapse into bed, boots still half-laced, and close your eyes before your head hits the pillow. You don't dream of riches or mansions. You dream of bright lights, warm music, and a world that, for one night, made space for your joy. Historical fact. Vaudeville was the most popular form of entertainment during the Gilded Age, offering variety shows filled with comedy, music, dance, and novelty acts accessible to working-class audiences. Quirky fact. Many saloons in working-class neighbourhoods offered free lunch to attract patrons, usually salty, heavy food that encouraged more drinking. It was never really free, but the myth lives on, an ongoing debate. Cultural historians still debate whether this entertainment in the Gilded Age served as an escape from exploitation or a distraction that prevented meaningful resistance and reform. You've been staring at the same set of train tracks for 15 minutes, wondering if today's the day they finally lead somewhere better. Not just out of your neighbourhood view, but out of this whole life. That's the fantasy, isn't it? The rags to riches dream. The tale they tell in penny papers and shop windows, a bootblack who becomes a banker, a street kid who becomes a steel magnate. All you need is grit, guts, and maybe a distant uncle with a small fortune and no heirs. But here's the truth they don't print. Most people don't make it. Most people don't even get close. You know the train yard by heart. You've worked here, carried crates along its edge, watched the boxcars creak past full of grain. Coal or pigs. You've seen men slip trying to jump them, their legs crushed like twigs. You've seen pickpockets working the platform crowds, children dancing between iron giants with reckless grace. The rails stretch west forever, and sometimes you catch yourself dreaming, what if I hopped one and never looked back? You wouldn't be the first. There's always someone chasing the myth of a better place. Some head for Chicago, others for Kansas. And then there's always the big one, California. Gold, oranges, sunshine. They say people are living like kings out there, even the poor ones. You're not sure if it's true, but the posters make it look like heaven. Wide open land, clear skies and clean shirts. No soot, no landlords banging on your door at dawn, just opportunity. But to get there you need money, or guts, or both. And right now, you're mostly working with blisters and a half-eaten biscuit in your pocket. Every so often someone you know does try to make a run for it. They don't call it escape, they call it ambition. They pack their things, a scarf, a coin and a cracked photo of their mother, and vanish. Sometimes they write back. Doing well, the letter says. Working hard, big plans, no details, just enough to keep the dream alive. Other times nothing comes, you never hear from them again. Maybe they made it. Maybe the train took them somewhere worse. You still want to believe in it though. The idea that if you just work hard enough, shake the right hands, say the right things, the world might open up. That someone will notice you, pluck you from the shadows and offer you something more than a double shift and a hot plate of disappointment. You've read the stories. Andrew Carnegie started as a bobbin boy. Now he's got library bitters named after him. Cornelius Vanderbilt sold ferry rides. Now he owns half the railroads. They make it sound easy. What they don't mention is the 1,000 others who sold ferry rides and ended up drowned. Or the boys who ran bobbins until they collapsed and were never heard from again. The rags to riches tale is like a magic trick. Flashy on the surface, hiding a dozen lies underneath. The truth? The system's built like a maze with invisible walls. You run hard, turn corners, chase light, and smack into barriers you didn't even know were there. Bad luck, wrong name, wrong colour, wrong country, one mistake and you're out. No second chances, just the slow realisation that the game was rigged before you were even born. And yet, people keep playing. Take Benny, your friend from the warehouse. He's got a ledger he writes in every night, tracking his savings like a banker. He reads business columns in the paper, even though he only understands half the words, and dreams of opening a storefront. He talks about it like it's already real. Dry goods, clean shelves, nothing fancy, just decent précis. He says it so often you start to believe it too. Then there's Mira, who takes in sewing at night. She's teaching herself English with a grammar book she found in the gutter, and she's writing a novel, a real one, about girls like her who refuse to stay invisible. She scribbles on brown paper bags, scraps of bills, anything with a blank side. Someday, she says, I'll be more than this. You don't laugh. You nod. Because hope is sacred, and you don't stomp on sacred things. Still, the odds are what they are. For every Horatio Alger story, there are 1,000 quiet failures. People who tried, people who broke, and people who were smart, driven, good, and still got swallowed whole by the machine. So you do what you can, you dream in manageable bites. You save coins, one at a time. You learn a new word, practice a new skill, shake hands with the guy who might know a guy. You chase small victories, a steady job, a repaired boot, a warm place to sleep. And when someone else does make it big, you tell their story with pride, like their luck is proof yours might come next. And maybe, just maybe, it will. Or maybe the rags to riches dream is just that. A dream. One invented by people who never had to live in rags to begin with. A story told to keep you working, keep you obedient, keep you hungry for something just out of reach. But what's the alternative? Give up? Accept the soot and the aching bones and say, this is it? No, not yet. Not while there's still a rail leading west, a light in the distance, a rumour of a better life just far enough away to chase. Historical fact, Horatio Alger's popular dime novels during the Gilded Age promoted the rags to riches ideal. Though most of his characters succeeded due to luck and the help of wealthy benefactors, not solely hard work. Quirky fact, some factories posted fake success stories on bulletin boards, profiles of workers who supposedly saved their wages and bought homes, to motivate others, though many of the stories were entirely fabricated. Ongoing debate. Economic historians argue whether upward mobility was a genuine possibility during the Gilded Age, or a myth perpetuated to maintain labour discipline and discourage unrest. You don't talk about race much. Not because it doesn't matter, it matters too much, but because saying the wrong thing, asking the wrong question, or even standing in the wrong place at the wrong time can get you beaten, fired, or worse. And for black Americans during the Gilded Age, worse isn't just a possibility, it's a daily reality. You see it in the streets, in the factory, on the train car where your co-worker isn't allowed to sit beside you. You see it in the way he lowers his eyes when the foreman walks by, even though he works twice as fast and never misses a shift. You see it in the silence, heavy as brick, filling every space that pretends everything's equal when it's anything but. The Civil War ended not even 40 years ago, and sure, slavery's technically over. But you'd be a fool to think freedom came with justice. You're in a northern city, far from the cotton fields, but that doesn't mean opportunity knocks any louder here. Segregation isn't just a southern law, it's a national habit. Signs don't always have to be posted. Everyone knows which door to use, which fountain's safe, which street to avoid after dark. It's unspoken, enforced not just by police, but by everyday people who nod at you in public and cross the street when he's coming. In your building, there's only one black family. They live on the top floor, next to the stairs with the broken railing. You've spoken to the mother once or twice, always politely, always briefly. She's soft-spoken, keeps to herself, and dresses like someone who expects to be watched. Her children go to the same school as yours, when they are allowed to, but they sit in the back row and are always the last to be called on. The teacher pretends not to notice. So do most people. Your factory hires black workers, but only for certain jobs, the dirtiest ones, the hottest rooms, the most dangerous tasks. They get paid less. They get no chance to rise. One of the men, Elijah, works beside you in the loading bay. You talk sometimes, not about anything deep, just the weather, the weight of the crates, how the boss smells like onions. He's smart, faster than you, sharper too, but a foreman's assistant job opens up, they don't even let him apply. You ask why. You're told to mind your business. Even when black workers organise, they get left behind. The union meetings you attend sometimes feel like they're for white workers only, even if no one says it out loud. When someone raises a hand and says, "So what about the coloured men?" The room shifts, eyes roll, and someone mutters, "They've got their own problems." As if it's not all the same problem, just different faces of the same crushing machine. Some do fight back. Black communities build their own institutions, churches, schools, newspapers. You've read an issue of The Coloured American, passed to you by a man on the corner. The writing is fierce, intelligent, full of fire. It says the things no one else will say out loud. That freedom without equality is just a prettier kind of cage. That being able to vote means nothing if you're turned away from the polls with a sneer and a nightstick. That working twice as hard for half the pay isn't opportunity, it's theft in broad daylight. The South is worse. You hear the stories. Lynchings, burnings, whole towns where black families vanish overnight. No trials, no questions, just ropes and torches and mobs with God on their lips and hate in their hands. And the North pretends to be better, but only just. Racism here is quieter, dressed in suits instead of hoods, but it still locks doors, still shortens lives, still tells black children that they're lucky to be allowed to try. And it's not just black Americans facing it. Chinese labourers on the West Coast are being blamed for stealing jobs, beaten in the streets, their homes set on fire. The Chinese Exclusion Act passed in 1882 makes it clear. Some people will never be welcome, no matter how hard they work or how long they stay. Others, Mexican workers in Texas, titting to people shoved onto shrinking patches of land, Irish immigrants with the wrong accent, are tolerated only when useful, and discarded the moment they speak up. The system thrives on division. If the workers are busy turning on each other, they are too distracted to turn on the men upstairs. So prejudice becomes policy, hatred becomes habit. The American dream gets handed out in pieces, and the rules say who gets which piece, if any. You think about this sometimes, late at night, when you lie awake and hear footsteps in the hallway, or when you pass Elijah and notice the way he smiles less these days. You wonder what it would take for things to truly change, not just laws, not just pamphlets, but minds, hearts. You wonder if it's possible in a country that can build steel empires but still refuses to build fairness. Then you remember the people who keep trying anyway. The black woman who teaches night school in a church basement, the editor printing a newspaper on borrowed ink in defiance. The teenager who stands up in class, demands a real answer, and doesn't care if the teacher flinches. Change doesn't come fast, it doesn't come free, but it comes, one act of resistance at a time, and you start by listening. Historical fact. Despite the abolition of slavery, black Americans during the Gilded Age faced systemic racism, economic exploitation and violence. Jim Crow laws were enacted across the South, and racial segregation was enforced nationwide in both legal and social forms. Quirky fact, in some northern cities, black communities established their own fire brigades, schools, and even opera houses due to exclusion from white institutions. Ongoing debate. Scholars continue to debate the Gilded Age's legacy for black Americans, whether it was a period of unfulfilled promise after emancipation, or a time of deliberate retrenchment into new forms of racial control. The river cuts through the city like a scar, wide, grey, and always moving. You walk along it sometimes when the factory lets out early, your boots crunching over broken glass and rusted nails, past warehouses with doors that never close, and docks that groan like tired bones. The air smells like salt, smoke, and something worse you can't quite name. It's filthy, but it's also the reason the city exists. Barges, ferries, tugboats belching steam. This is the artery through which money flows. Not your money, of course, but someone's. Industry touches everything here. Look in any direction and you'll find a smokestack coughing up progress, a crane lifting steel, or a crew unloading crates of who knows what from a freighter that came from who knows where. You pass a meatpacking plant on your way home, where pigs go in one end and sausages come out the other. There's a textile mill nearby too, where the clack of looms never stops, even on holidays. If the world is built on labour, then this city is its blueprint, and you're one of the bricks. You can feel it in your lungs, that black grit from the coal yard that clings to your teeth, gets under your nails, turns your snot grey. You feel it in your back when you lift one too many barrels, or in your wrists when you've hammered rivets for 14 hours straight. But industry doesn't care about your bones. It's hungry, and your dinner. Sometimes you stand outside the big buildings, those red brick cathedrals of commerce with tall arched windows and brass letters over the door, and wonder what goes on inside. Not the factory floor. You know what happens there, noise, heat, injury, repetition. No, you wonder about the top floors, the ones with rugs, the ones with doors that lock. That's where the decisions are made. Men in suits, soft hands, firm voices, sitting at polished desks deciding how much your time is worth. Not you, of course. They don't know your name. To them, you're a number on a ledger, an output calculation, a cost to be reduced. Take the steel tycoons. They build cities out of iron, send bridges arcing across rivers, carve rail lines through mountains. And all the while they smile for the papers like kings of industry, even as their workers drop dead from heat stroke or fall into vats of molten metal. You read about one factory that kept a cart near the smelting room, not for tools, but for bodies. They called it the flesh wagon. That's the price of progress. The city grows upward too. Skyscrapers, they're calling them now. 10, 15, even 20 stories tall. They rise above the smog like monuments to ambition. Built by men in suspenders who hang off the edge of beams with nothing but rope and hope between them and death. You know, a guy who walked steel like that once made it 3 months before a gust of wind took him off the 14th floor. His name was Carl. No one remembers him but his wife, and she stopped talking a week after the funeral. And yet the skyline keeps rising. Down by the waterfront, you see ships docked from Europe, Asia, the Caribbean, cargo stacked in wooden crates like oversized coffins, bananas from Honduras, cotton from Alabama, teak from India. Everything is being traded, moved, weighed, taxed, and behind it all, someone's making money. Not the dock worker with the crooked back, not the kid pushing the cart, but someone. And if you look closely, you can see the city itself changing, growing into something bigger, colder, more mechanical. Horse-drawn carts give way to electric trolleys, gas lamps blink out in favour of buzzing bulbs. Telegraph poles run like nervous systems through every street, connecting the merchants, the banks, the brokers, the bosses. You can send a message 1,000 miles now in the blink of an eye. You, of course, can't afford to send one, but the men upstairs can. Everything is faster now, louder, hungrier. The gears of the machine turn quicker each year, and you're still stuck on the same rung, sweating harder just to stay in place. You think about quitting sometimes, heading for the hills, working a patch of land, breathing clean air. But you're no farmer. You wouldn't know a plough from a paperweight, and even if you did, land costs money. And money, that's the iron chain wrapped around your ankle, keeping you in this city, this life, this daily grind. Still, there are moments when you step back just for a second and see the full machinery. The gears, the smoke, the cables running overhead, the brick and iron jungle throbbing with energy. It's ugly. It's cruel. But it's also something. A marvel. A monster. A marvelling monster. And you're in it. Part of it. Not a celebrated part. Not the architect or the investor. But a piece of the mechanism. Your sweat is in these streets. Your fingerprints are in the mortar. Your blood's probably in the water supply, if we're being honest. You're not just living through the Gilded Age, you're building it. Historical fact. The Gilded Age saw massive industrial expansion, including the rise of steel production, railroads, and shipping ports. Major cities like New York and Chicago became global industrial hubs practically overnight. Quirky fact, some Gilded Age factories ran 24/7 and employed third-shift workers whose job included waking the next shift by literally knocking on workers' windows with long sticks or poles. Ongoing debate. While some historians celebrate the era's technological and industrial advances, others argue it was achieved through systemic exploitation and environmental degradation that disproportionately harmed the working class. The city gets loud when people have had enough. Not the usual noise, clanging trolleys, barking vendors, the eternal screech of iron against stone, but a different kind, sharper, unified. You hear it in the chants echoing down narrow alleys, in the stomp of boots marching across cobblestone, in the sudden, furious silence when the police line appears. That's when you know this isn't just another bad week. This is a strike. It starts like they always do. Rumours, whispers over lunch pails. Someone says the pay got cut again at the other mill. Someone else says they're hiring scabs down the street. A guy you trust says the union's meeting tonight, and you should come. You almost don't. You're tired, your back hurts, and missing a shift could mean losing your job, but you go anyway because something in your chest won't sit still anymore. The meeting is in a back room above a bakery, the air thick with sweat and stale bread. Men, and a few women, gather shoulder to shoulder, eyes darting, voices low. Someone stands at the front and says what everyone's already thinking. This can't go on. 12-hour days, 6 days a week for barely enough to survive. The machines break down more than ever. The foreman screams more. 2 guys got hurt last week, and management didn't even blink. One of them might lose a hand, his fault, they said. Improper use of equipment. As if the equipment hadn't been falling apart for months. Someone else speaks up, asks about organising. There's debate, worry, The last time workers tried to walk out, the police came down like a hammer. But there's a fire building in the room, and you can feel it catch. These people are tired of swallowing their anger. Tired of pretending maybe next year will bring better pay, safer hours, a boss who sees them as human. You leave that night feeling equal parts terrified and electric. A few days later, it begins. You show up to the factory gates and stop. You stand there, fists clenched, heart pounding. One by one, your co-workers gather beside you. Some carry signs, others just stand with their arms crossed, defiant. You don't have a plan, not a real one, just a line in the dirt and the decision not to cross it. The boss comes out, red-faced and shouting, "Get back inside or you're all fired." No one moves. A few scabs arrive, new hires, desperate or clueless, maybe both. You jeer, you beg, you shout, some turn around, others don't. It's messy, it always is. By noon, the factory's quiet. No machines, no smoke, no orders barked across the floor, just workers in the street and the smell of something shifting. The newspapers call it a disturbance. The factory calls it unauthorized disruption. You call it necessary. You hold the line for days, maybe weeks. You organize pickets, share food, pass out leaflets. You learn chants in 3 different languages and shout them until your voice breaks. You get to know your fellow workers in ways you never had time for before. What they're fighting for, who they've lost, what they still hope to build. But then comes the response. Police show up with clubs and riot gear, even if no one's rioting yet. They say you're blocking the street, that you're impeding commerce, that you're trespassing on private property, even if that property wouldn't exist without your labour. One night they charge. No warning, no negotiation, just fists and boots and batons. You go down, hard, a blow to the ribs, a boot to the shoulder. Someone's blood, not yours, not at first, spatters your shirt. The next morning the paper says the workers turned violent, that agitators attacked police, that outside radicals, foreigners, anarchists, communists are stirring up trouble. You know the truth. You are just standing still. Your ribs ache for a week. You don't go to the hospital, can't afford it. The girl down the hall brings you a compress soaked in vinegar and mutters something about solidarity. You don't ask her name, but you don't forget her face. Some workers cave. They go back. You can't blame them. Their kids are hungry, their rent's overdue. Some get evicted during the strike, their belongings dumped on the curb like trash. Others get blacklisted, names passed around to make sure they never work again. That's the system's favourite trick. Starve you into obedience, then punish you for starving, but you keep showing up, even when the crowd thins. Even when your hope does too. Then finally a crack. The papers say the factory owner has agreed to a meeting. It's not much, but it's something. You send representatives, carefully chosen, clean shirts, practiced voices. They talk hours behind closed doors. When they come out, the news is mixed. A small raise, shorter shifts, a promise to revisit safety rules. It's not justice, but it's not defeat. You go back to work. The machines groan like they missed you. The foreman scowls but says nothing. For the first time, he doesn't yell when you pause to wipe sweat from your brow. It's subtle, but it matters. You've drawn a line, and it held. The scars will fade, some faster than others. The bruises, the broken trust, but something remains, not just in your body, but in the air. The knowledge that you're not alone, that together you can shake the ground. It wasn't revolution, but it was resistance, and sometimes that's how revolutions begin. Historical fact, major labour strikes like the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the Haymarket Affair in 1886, and the Homestead Strike in 1892 defined the Gilded Age as a time of fierce labour conflict and violent crackdowns. Quirky fact, some striking workers used brass bands and theatre performances during protests to attract crowds and sway public opinion, a mix of activism and entertainment that doubled as a morale booster. Ongoing debate. Scholars still argue over whether the Gilded Age strikes were successful in shifting labour conditions or if they merely delayed harsher crackdowns by increasingly organised industrial capitalists. The years sneak up on you. One morning you wake up and your back doesn't bend the way it used to. Your hands are permanently rough no matter how much lye soap you use. The same boots you've worn for a decade creak louder than the floorboards, and your knees make their own weather predictions. You used to laugh about old men at the factory hobbling around like scarecrows. Now someone calls you sir, and you don't even correct them. The Gilded Age doesn't come with a pension. There's no gold watch waiting at the end, no retirement party, no thank you card signed by management. You work until you can't, or until they stop letting you, whichever comes first. One day your shift gets cut in half. Then you're told the shop is moving in a different direction. Suddenly the thing that defined your life, your week, your worth, vanishes. What do you do now? Will you try to find odd jobs, deliveries, repairs? Some days you walk for miles looking for someone who needs a pair of hands, even if those hands tremble when they grip a hammer. Most times you get a maybe next week or a flat no. You start noticing other men doing the same loop, slower, older, carrying that same tired look. A brotherhood of the discarded. The worst part isn't the hunger. You're used to that. It's the stillness, the long stretches of nothing, watching life go on while you sit on a stoop with your elbows on your knees, staring at your own shadow like it owes you rent. You start fixing things that don't need fixing. You clean for no one. You offer advice that no one asks for. You feel yourself fading into the background noise of the city you helped build. Some nights, when the cough in your chest won't settle and your legs are too restless to sleep, you walk the neighbourhood like a ghost. You pass factories where you once knew every gear and groove. Now they're filled with new faces, newer machines, bosses who don't remember your name. Or worse, factories that are shuttered completely, windows broken, doors boarded. Even the noise you hated is gone. You miss it. In the tenement you hear the younger ones whisper about the future. They talk about organising again, about reading books by people with names you can't pronounce. They talk about socialism, democracy, progress. You want to believe in it, you do, but belief has become harder with age, not impossible, just heavier. It takes more effort to lift hope when your spine's already carrying 30 years of disappointment. And yet some things surprise you. One morning your daughter, now a teenager with a voice sharp as a tack, comes home from school waving a paper. Top marks. She's grinning like she just won a fight. "I'm going to be a teacher," she says, and you believe her. Because she says it like a promise, not a dream. You remember all the nights she read by candlelight, practicing words you barely knew. You didn't think she noticed you watching her, but she did. She sits with you now and reads the newspaper out loud. She explains the articles, tells you who the politicians are and what they're arguing about. When you ask if any of them care about people like you, she just smirks and says, "Not yet." You start to write again. Nothing fancy, just a letter here and there. A journal in the margins of a discarded Bible. You write about the smells of the factory, the way the windows fogged in winter, the feeling of payday even when it wasn't enough. You wonder if it'll matter to anyone. Maybe not now, but maybe one day someone will find your words and understand what it meant to live like this. There's a boy who asks you about work, not because he wants to follow in your footsteps, but because he doesn't. He wants to understand what not to repeat. He asks what you regret, and you laugh and say, "My back, and not learning to duck when the foreman had a bad day." He laughs too, but you see him thinking, your world is still hard, rent still climbs, food still vanishes too quickly. The stove still sputters in the cold. But there's something different now, not easier, just brighter. Like a crack in the ceiling finally letting in light. It's not yours exactly. It belongs to them, the ones coming next. But you helped pry it open. The Gilded Age didn't give you much. It gave you calluses, stiff joints, a well-worn skepticism. But it also gave you this truth. Survival is its own kind of victory. You kept going, you didn't fall off the machine, and now your children are climbing higher. Not because the system changed, but because you gave them a leg up even when you barely had legs to stand on. You sit on your stoop and watch the city pass by. New buildings rising, new voices shouting. A protest down the block, loud and angry and full of promise. You nod. Let them shout. Let them rise. Maybe this time someone will listen. And if not, well, you left behind more than sweat. You left a story. Historical fact, few workers in the Gilded Age had access to any form of retirement or social safety net. Old age often meant poverty unless one had family support or extremely rare financial luck. Quirky fact, some workers would fake their age or physical ability late in life to remain employed, often lying on job applications just to survive a little longer on meagre wages. Ongoing debate. Historians continue to examine whether the suffering of Gilded Age labourers paved the way for modern labour reforms, or whether the system would have evolved regardless, driven by the larger economic forces. So here you are, stretched out on your creaky old cot, the night pressing in through cracked window panes, the city still humming somewhere beyond the bricks. You've walked the alleyways, clocked the hours, shouted on the picket lines, eaten the watery stew, and somehow you're still breathing. That's no small thing, not here, not now. The Gilded Age promised a golden future, but most of it was glitter stapled onto rot. You knew the truth. Behind every shining mansion was a factory furnace burning fingers and futures alike. You lived in that heat, worked in that soot, but you didn't just endure, you adapted. You learned. You hoped. You passed something forward. Tonight your story settles like dust on the floorboards. Quiet, but real. Real. Maybe it won't make the textbooks. Maybe no statue gets carved in your likeness. But you existed, you mattered. And you made damn sure that someone else could stand taller because of it. The city will keep grinding. The machines will keep spinning. But out there, in the hearts and minds of the children who watched you survive, something better is growing. A louder voice, a stronger spine, a dream less rigged and more real. So rest now. Not just because you're tired, but because you've earned it. Let the smoke rise without you for once. Let the factory doors stay shut in your mind. Let the echoes of the picket chant fade into something like peace. And if you're still awake, just barely, with the fan whirring softly and your eyes half closed, remember this. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fair, but you made it through. And that's history.